Hello and welcome to episode 145 of Stand Up. Joining me today for the first time, very excited to have author and analyst Jared Yates Sexton joining me. That conversation starts at 4 minutes and 30 seconds after I blather on for a few minutes. Then I've got the president and vice president of the Florida Education Association representing educators in Florida as we watch the schools try to reopen in the midst of a pandemic. That conversation begins at 56 minutes and 20 seconds. And finally, the executive director of Tax March, the brilliant and always hilarious Maura Quint. That one begins at 1 hour, 35 minutes, and 24 seconds. My name is Pete Dominic. It is time to stand up with me right now. Hey, guys. Welcome to the big show. Have you ever been trying to tape the opening to your podcast and realized you had one too many glasses of wine? My friend Schmeat Mominick had that happen on his podcast tonight, but not here. That would never happen. That would never happen here. No siree. Stone sober. Right now at the top of the top of the podcast. It is day 1274 of our long national nightmare. There are 109 days, I think, left until the presidential election. And even then, after November 3rd, even if Biden crushes Trump, and it's in some extent a fair election, it's going to be crazy what happens. My daughter just walked in at the opening. What do you need? They're out on the counter. I couldn't. Okay. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Add me on Instagram at eva.dominic, and my TikTok is eva.dominic.
Stop. Give me the microphone. Get out of here. Get out of here. I can't believe you plugged your...
Actually, I think my Instagram is ava.dominic_, and my TikTok is ava.dominic.
You can't plug your social media on my... Get your own podcast.
Please.
No, don't follow her. Anyway, where was I? Oh, it's day 1274 of our national nightmare. 110 days left until Election Day. And even, I was saying, if Joe Biden wins, that's going to be such a crazy time. What's called the lame duck session. Anyway, all right. I've got to get to the guests because the guests on today's show are so good. I met Fed Ingram and Andrew Spar a few years ago when Andrew, who's a longtime listener of the show, hired me to come down to rally the troops at the Florida teachers unions, and we became real good friends, and then he introduced me to Fed, and they're both on the show today because the eyes of America are on Florida's schools. Florida goes back to school in mid-August, and they have, as I'm sure you know, a huge spike down there. All you folks listening to this podcast in Florida, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. I had Dr. Barry Hummel on Monday's show, who's a Florida resident. It was interesting to hear from him, but my heart goes out to you. We went through it here in New York, and I'm sure you're experiencing a lot of similar emotions and fears and concerns as we all are. So I talked with Fed and Andrew about the absolute nightmare that the Florida education system is and the Florida government is with the Secretary of Education, of course, their horrible governor, Rick DeSantis. Great conversation, really inspiring, these two guys. I'm so glad that they are the leaders down there. I've met so many great Florida educators over the years, and my heart goes out to them and all of you down there listening. Maura Quint joins me. She is always awesome. Love talking to Maura about everything. It's tax day, and so she is the executive director of the Tax March, and we had a great conversation about several things, including tax policy and wardrobe as well. She's always great. So she's coming up later as well. But first, I want to introduce for the first time on the show, writer and political analyst Jared Yates Sexton. His most recent book is called American Rule: How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. What you're about to hear is one of the best conversations that's occurred, I think, on the podcast so far. I'm really excited to have discovered his work. If you're not familiar with him, I'm super excited to introduce you to him. He's on Twitter at JY Sexton, And I think we are new friends. It went really well. He's got an awesome podcast as well that he puts out a couple times a week called The Muckrake, themuckrake.com. Massive following on Twitter, and a really great guy, author, smart dude. Had a great conversation with him, and that is going to begin right now. Okay, here he is now. I'm really excited to finally get him. His, as I've just told you about, his book is a must-buy, must-read, and he's a must-follow. Jared Yates Sexton on Twitter at JYSexton. It's great to finally get to talk to you and to get you here on the podcast, man. I'm a big fan of your work. Thanks for joining me.
Well, I'm a fan of yours. This is awesome, man. Thanks.
So a lot to talk with you about, but because I just talked to two of the leaders of the Florida Educators Association, I wanted to talk with you about your recent tweet thread as applies to your book about what is happening with the federal government and the Department of Education led by, you know what, I was going to make fun of her. Let me let you make fun of her in terms of how you would describe Betsy DeVos's background and religion, her brother Eric Prince. I mean, it's crazy. Before COVID, Betsy DeVos, Department of Education, that she's the Secretary of Education. But now you just had this epic tweet thread about the danger here posed by her and her plans. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really weird because to even try and wrap your head around the Trump administration, you have to literally reverse everything that you think is true. You grew up in this country and you think that, oh, this person got elected president. Obviously, they're trying to make the country better, and maybe they'll fail. And maybe they'll have bad ideas that won't necessarily work the way you expect. But Donald Trump isn't president for any public good. He's not a patriot. He doesn't have any sort of duty. This is the kind of person who is like the opposite of JFK. He thinks about what the country can do for him as opposed to what he can do for the country. And so he has surrounded himself with this rogues gallery of anti-government officials. And DeVos is one of these people to a T. I would actually make the argument that I think the blame for a lot of this stuff for her gets sort of lost in the maelstrom around Trump, right? Because this is a person who comes from extraordinarily wealthy, right? And influence and privilege. She has spent her entire life trying to dismantle public education. That is her goal. That's why she's Secretary of Education. And when she goes on like, oh God, what was it the other day? State of the Union on CNN or whatever. And she's asked, what's your plan for, making sure that students are safe during the pandemic? She has no plan, because to plan would mean to help public education. She has no interest in that. She's there to literally dismantle public education. And here's the reason why. And nobody wants to talk about it, right? Like, they don't want a Secretary of Education on CNN and then accuse the Secretary of Education of being anti-education. But it's true. Because what's actually gone on for decades in this country is that ever since desegregation, the evangelical right and wealthy white Americans have been trying to resegregate the country, right? They've tried to undo the civil rights legislation and are trying to lead to a situation where white wealthy students will be in one educational system and people of color and poor people will be in another education system. And immediately after desegregation, they created segregation academies and these private Christian schools. That way the government couldn't tell them what to do. And unfortunately, DeVos and all the people around her are into privatization, and they are into dismantling any system for public good. And that's what she's doing right now.
I would not push back, but ask you to refine your point that she's not anti-education. She's anti the public education we have gotten to know and understand, and many of us have been educated by, which we can all quibble with and be critical of, but the idea of public education, and she is pro a different kind of education. Is that, am I splitting hairs?
Well, okay, so one thing that we have to think about is we have to think about the war on education, right? So, I've talked about this previously on Twitter and in a couple of my articles. There used to be this weird public education, particularly 1940s, 1950s, going into the 1960s, where, like, let's say at college, right? You would go to college, and then the college would sort of be your parent. They would make sure that, oh no, men and women weren't in the same dorm room after a certain time, right? Or nobody was holding hands on the campus square. And on top of that, the universities were also receiving public funds in order to develop weapons for the military and to experiment on students to figure out social science ways of winning the Cold War. It's a really weird, bizarre time. Well, of course, then in the 1960s and 1970s, free speech culture, anti-war culture starts coming up. Well, guess what? The American right doesn't like that, right? And then all of a sudden what happens is the same thing we hear now, which is like you have a bunch of Republicans running around screaming about indoctrination. They really want to indoctrinate our students. They're teaching them these radical ideas. Well, that's not true. Public education is about giving people the information that they need. But in order to dismantle what they believed was liberal indoctrination, they have then created their own indoctrination, which is the idea of indoctrination. We have to create a new educational path. That way they can basically feed them propaganda, raise them up on an anti-subversive curriculum, and, make sure that they are loyal workers and loyal Republican voters. And that's what they're looking for.
Well, it's also, and you've written and talked about this, and I saw that you just interviewed Catherine Stewart, who I interviewed about her excellent book. Sarah Posner also has a really great book as well that corresponds to the point that I'm making, which is they have changed education in a way to privatize and profit from it. So they have, for years now, we have seen public education be fought over to try to make money off of it. And Betsy DeVos has been at the forefront of that, privatizing public education, creating competition in education so that there are winners and losers. That's the problem that I have. There should not be winners and losers in public education. There shouldn't be this idea of a profit motive or a competitive motive. I know people argue about that. But it's weird because it would seem that the idea of making money off education would somehow maybe be at odds with Christianity, with religion. But you've written a lot about this. There's names for it. There's a lot of research. How does the kind of evangelical right correspond with getting as rich as you can when it comes to our public schools?
Yeah, it seems antithetical, right? I mean, really. The idea of it is completely contradictory, but the problem in this country...
It seems antithetical based on what... And I'm no religious scholar, but on Christ's teachings. On Christ's teachings, it seems antithetical, but maybe I'm reading the wrong stuff.
Well, and there's the problem right there, because what has happened is when we talk about Christianity in America, it's sort of a blanket term, right? It's the idea that everybody is following the teachings of Christ. But what we're actually talking about right now is what I've come to refer to as the cult of the Shining City, right? And it's white identity, neo-Confederate, paranoid, apocalyptic evangelicalism. So to give people an idea, I grew up in this. And this is one of the only reasons that I understand it, because when I start talking about this, sometimes people, their jaws will drop and they're like, there's no way that's true. And I'm like, no, this is actual history. This is stuff that people actually believe. And especially since 2016, we're starting to recognize that it's there. Right? That this thing has metastasized and it's sort of like grown up and sort of like grown up over the system. So this idea of the cult of the Shining City, as I call it, it starts out particularly during the Confederacy, which we don't like to talk about, because when you actually talk about the Confederacy, it's like a twisted mirror of who we are now, right? Like you can start to see how we got to the place that we are now. And, everybody wants to pretend like the Confederacy was like this, I don't know, noble and like sort of, antiquated system or whatever. But it's actually a Christian theocratic nightmare where everybody is preaching that not only does the God prefer Confederacy, but that, the God of Christianity is actually a white supremacist God, right? He has chosen the white people to lord over all people of color, right? That's his system. That's how he created the universe, through white supremacy.
This isn't your interpretation.
No, this is literal history. That's the thing. I was so shocked when I found this, and then I would reach out to historians, in a lather. And I would just be like, there's no way this is true.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the historians would be like, oh, yeah, that's completely true. And I was like, cool, great. I'm glad to hear it, right? So what ends up
justifying slavery based on that's what God wants. I mean, to shorten it as much as possible, I suppose.
Well, but here's the thing. Based on white supremacy, and this is something most people don't understand about white supremacy isn't necessarily the hatred of people of color. It's the idea that people of color can't take care of themselves, and they need white people to protect them and guide them, right? Because otherwise they might be manipulated by other people. And by the way, when I talk about that, I'm talking about Jewish people manipulating them. That's the entire conspiracy theory that we're dealing with now. So the Confederacy ends, but it doesn't just go away. You know, It's not like as soon as we turn the page on that history chapter, it's not like everyone's like, all right, we're not white supremacists anymore, because we totally are. And it gets absorbed into culture and politics. And one thing that ends up happening is that there are a bunch of Southern preachers who are still preaching Confederate religion. And foremost among them, I'm always pointing them out, is Jerry Falwell. And Jerry Falwell actually gains a lot of power in the late 1950s, 1960s, when desegregation efforts start up. And by the way, everybody remembers Jerry Falwell as being at the front of like anti-abortion protest, right? But that's not where it started. That's not where the evangelical right gained its power. The evangelical right gained its power fighting segregation. And he would go out and he would say, you do not cross a line that God has drawn, right? And he starts pointing out, like Martin Luther King, and if you remember how civil rights actually worked, it was actually very largely a Christian movement, right? It was the idea, oh, you read the Bible? Well, I read the Bible too, and here's what the Bible tells me. And when you actually look at the heart of like Christ's, Sermons on the Mount and all of, the New Testament stuff, it's actually a religion of mercy and social justice. This is like Christ out there washing prostitutes' feet.
Right, which is always why I have been astonished that the right, I hate to use these labels, but there's no other way to say it, has demonized the phrase social justice. I was like, wait, that's bad? It's bad to seek social justice? It's bad to be a warrior for social justice? That's a bad thing? I thought that's what Christ was, a social justice warrior, an SJW. Yep.
But actually what ends up happening, and I'm really glad that you said it in that exact way, what ends up happening is that Christianity gets perverted by people with political machinations, right? So all of a sudden the American evangelical right, these neo-Confederates, they change Christianity wholesale. They get rid of that social justice stuff. And what they actually do is they start talking about a religion of prosperity. Which is where if you have a bunch of money and you have wealth and power, that means that God has shined on you, right? That means that somehow or another that you are one of the chosen people. Which, by the way, weirdly enough, was part of the reason why the Third Reich took over in Germany. They actually perverted Jesus Christ and turned him into the first anti-Semite. They actually started preaching a religion of Christianity in Nazi Germany in which it was like, oh, look at how Jesus threw out the money changers in the temple. He was the first Aryan warrior, right? So what ends up happening is they take all this religious mythology and they just twist it and pervert it however they want, and they create a myth and an alternate reality, which is the one that we live in. They preach that we are in a system, and this is all Confederate mythology that's just been reborn. If you want to talk about the New World Order, you want to talk about Deep State, you want to talk about QAnon, it's the idea that there is a system that is perfect and good. It's godly, right? And there's a supernatural war against evil. And it's always Jewish puppet masters who are manipulating people of color and also using democratic liberal traders to undermine God's shining city. So what you end up in is an alternate reality where it's a supernatural battle between good and evil, and it worships power and wealth. And then weirdly enough, a completely, sinful, however you want to look at it, guy like Donald Trump comes around and everyone's like, why do they worship him? And it's like, no, he is the embodiment of this movement, right? He is a white supremacist, he is wealthy, and he is powerful. As a result, God has shined on him, he is their warrior. It's a really weird thing, but I mean, it's all true.
It is all true, and you write about it in your excellent book, and you talk about it all the time, which is why I'm so excited to finally get you on the podcast and be in conversation with you about it. But the way you talk about it, just now I'm looking at the last, 200 years, and you think about slavery in America, you think about the Third Reich in Germany and World War II, and you think about Trumpism and QAnon now, and I'm not comparing the three. Settle down, everybody. I mean, I am comparing the three in terms of the way that they kind of use, the way that you just explained, they use religion.
I'll compare them.
Okay,
I'll do it.
You can compare.
Yeah, I'll compare them.
You can do it. I'm not saying I can't. I don't have the statistics or the knowledge, I think. But the point of it is in every one of these eras, you see this playing out. And I do want to talk about the QAnon era. And you had tweeted about this the other day because I share your concern about how quickly this is spreading and why. But so take over.
Well, so again,
sorry for not having a specific question there. I'm a real
no. Listen, I'm actually very fascinated by this whole thing. Not just because it is dangerous. I mean, if you actually dismantle everything from I mean, the New World Order inspired Timothy McVeigh to bomb the Oklahoma City Federal Building, right? He thought he was an invisible soldier in an invisible war.
The way you say it, though, is as if there is a New World Order. Just now.
Exactly.
Just now. You said the New World Order, but there isn't. And there's this idea of... Go ahead.
Well, there's a shadow of a New World Order. And that's what I wanted to talk about was whenever we have these conspiracy theories are actually simplified explanations of larger, more complicated ideas, right?
Well said. Yes, yes, the New World Order is the G7 or it's the World Health Organization. It's countries working together.
It's globalism.
Yeah.
And ironically, one of the things that's happened, and this is, again, we were talking before we started taping about like how these things aren't necessarily communicated, right? Like, I wish somebody on TV would say this. It's very, very simple, okay? The New World Order is globalism. What party constructed globalism in America? The Republican Party. Right? So immediately what ends up happening is that globalism happens particularly under the presidency of Bill Clinton, who's finishing up George H.W. Bush's NAFTA project, right? And so all of a sudden the Republicans are like, that thing that we voted to make happen is the evil work of satanic pedophile criminal rings, right? And they say, oh, there's a reason why your jobs are going away. These people are against you. They're traitors. And by the way, it's really hard to understand economics. You know what I mean? Like, I had to do research for this book, and I had to read the documents. I still have the student loans to show for my education, you know? I'm diving into all these books and reading all these experts. It's still hard for me to understand how the globalist economic system works. Well, guess what's a lot easier than explaining things like the G7 or the G8 and all these trade organizations? They are evil and they're against you. Done. And do you know who believes it? People like my family, who lost their jobs, factory workers, and no, it's so perverse that you have to laugh sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
No, yes, you do, because otherwise you absolutely go insane. But you don't. If you laugh in their face, it only makes them believe in it stronger. It would seem.
Right. And so then, like, let's move forward to the deep state, which is just the New World Order with some sloppy paint on it. Well, who constructed the so-called deep state? Who was the party who created never-ending wars that never really had any justification behind them, right? Who created this military-industrial complex that, like, sort of operates outside of whoever is president? The Republican Party. And then you have Donald Trump come along and say, I'm going to take on the deep state. And it's like professional wrestling. Everybody behind the scenes is having a conversation about how they're going to, work together while fighting each other. And so it's a simplification of a much larger idea that then tells people, guess what? They're coming for you. They're coming for your family. They're going to kill. They're going to hurt everyone you know. Well, if you're in an invisible war, doesn't that mean you protect your family at all costs? Right? And all of a sudden you're like buying a bunch of guns, you're prepping for a race war. All of a sudden you're ready to take on the UN or the New World Order or whoever's going to show up at your house. And you're being told the next election is do or die. And by the way, the liberals are going to sell you out. And some of them are out there torturing children and trafficking children. Well, immediately you're in a war, right? So that operates on a way to legitimize fascistic, premeditated sort of precautionary war, which is actually what has made every authoritarian state ever do what it does. They create a conspiracy theory and then they solve it. And that's unfortunately, how things have always worked.
Yeah, they build a fire and then put it out.
Yeah, so, and by the way, like, if there's a fire, I need power to put that fire out. You know what I mean? Like, so Donald Trump creates all these crises. He fails, and then he says, you know why I failed? There's a conspiracy. I need more power to fight the thing that I just created.
Well said. So, but let me just go back to kind of the New World Order and globalism and just talk about, I think I understand economics enough to explain it in that, I don't know, when, I guess industrialization changed everything in a way, and then obviously newer technology and the digital age changed everything. But the point is, Henry Ford could only use to sell cars in America. But then once Ford could start selling cars in other countries, things change. That's a product. Then there are services. You could generally only provide your services if you're a lawyer in your community or a dentist even in your community. But then everything changed, and now you can sell your services all over the world. Now, we can talk about whether that's good or bad. or we can talk about whether that's some grand plan, but it's really not. I mean, anybody wants to sell their product or service to anyone who wants to buy it. I don't know what that economic system is called. I don't know exactly what more to say specifically about it, but basically it's become this huge conspiracy theory. We can talk about the ethics of trade and free trade versus fair trade and all of that. The bottom line is technology changed everything. You could sell your car, service, or product not only in your community or your country, but all over the world, and we just have to change with it. How did I do?
I mean, you're accurate, and it goes so much deeper. First of all, I find it ironic that your example was Henry Ford, who was like one of the original purveyors of anti-Semitism.
I use Henry Ford because of the whole thing where he paid his employees enough that they could buy the product they're building, but that wasn't noble. I picked him. I always pick him to talk to try to articulate this because he only paid them so they could buy it because he couldn't sell them in China. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, he is.
And by the way, with Henry Ford, who is like one of the people who not only spread anti-Semitism, but was actually a hero of Adolf Hitler, right? Like, this is like Hitler, the one portrait he had in his office was Henry Ford. And then you have like the Ford Motor Company that has like weird shadowy ties during the Third Reich, which shows us something, which is we end up in a place where you and I are talking about something called the United States of America, right? Like, we're thinking about like Star-Spangled Bunting, we're thinking about apple pie, baseball, all of this stuff. People who like rise up to a certain point on the economic ladder, they don't really think in terms of countries anymore. They're sort of countryless, right? So like, for instance, we have
and their money's probably not in the country they made it.
Well, and they're not, because one of the things that globalism did was it made it possible to where, like, okay, in America, we have a minimum wage. We have OSHA standards, right? Well, what happens if I don't want to pay minimum wage? What happens if I don't want to go to those environmental standards? Well, I'll go to a country where I don't, so I'm actually, like, circumventing the entire thing. Well, what happens if America raises my taxes? Well, I'm going to leave America, and I'll shuffle some things around. So what ends up happening, and I keep trying to explain this to people, is there are a group of people in this world who are part of what I call post-politics, right? And Donald Trump is one of them. He's not interested in our idea of what a country is. He's interested in using America sort of as a cog in a bigger machine, right? He's not actually loyal to America. He never has been. He sold America out one time after another. Corporations are not political. They're post-political. They want to get past elections. They want to get to a point where they're not hindered by bills and legislation. The goal is always to create a system with as little friction as possible for these people, right? They want to expedite profit. They want to expedite power. And so we're sitting here talking about elections while everybody else is a couple of steps ahead talking about this post-political environment, which leads to things like managed democracy, which has elections, but there aren't really choices, right? We have an environment where all of a sudden, I don't know, we're fighting about Goya beans versus, whether or not schools should have, money to help them open safely in the fall. And we just start having this spectacle, and it turns into this illusory environment that unfortunately is really hard to nail down and really hard to understand. I mean, this is advanced level Sudoku stuff. And the rest of us are still like, man, do you remember the Star-Spangled Banner when we all stood up and, put our hands over our hearts? And meanwhile, other people are talking more about an exploitive environment that doesn't really resemble anything that we ever have experienced.
Do you have ideas as to the catalysts for what create this mindset the most? Because I feel like and I'd love to be wrong about this, so if I am, tell me. But I feel like obviously, this is a very huge, nuanced question or answer, but I feel like the biggest problem in America is the way that our media works and where the profit motive in media lies. There's obviously an argument about news, being not for profit, a really good argument, or other industries as well, as we talked about earlier, education, or war. But I feel like the right-wing media, which is now easier to, I almost call them the conspiracy media, is so powerful, Jared. And I don't know how that toothpaste ever goes back in the tube, genie goes back in the bottle, or a better old saying. But I feel like so much of it is Hannity and Rush and Mark Levin and obviously Alex Jones and now the internet, QAnon and so on, and which is they created Trump in a big way. They made him popular, and to some extent corporate mainstream media as well by giving him a platform for the ratings. But I feel like so much of it is the right-wing media. How much truth is there, and is there any solution to that? They're never going to stop.
I think modern right-wing media is one of the most dangerous inventions that we've ever actually had. Right? So, like, there's this big, long, complicated process where media becomes an entertainment, and all of a sudden it starts prioritizing things that aren't good for America. I mean, let's just be honest here. The mainstream media, and I'm talking about MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, they are addicted to the ratings and the clicks that Donald Trump brings them.
Well, because their revenue model is a hybrid of subscriptions and ads, and you get subscriptions and ads by making people want to read, buy, see your product.
He's wonderful for their business. And he always has been, and it's one of the reasons that he's president. I mean, I want to say the study I read for one of my books was something like $6 billion worth of free advertising in 2016, right? Like, they don't want to admit that they're addicted to Donald Trump, but he is the perfect catalyst for profits for mainstream media. Well, over here on the right, there's actually been this bizarre thing. So, like, when Roger Ailes originally pioneered Fox News, he did it with the explicit purpose of turning it into a propaganda arm for the Republican Party. He wanted to create an alternate reality that would help Republicans win the presidency and win national office. So that was the intention. And of course, one of the great ironies is this slogan of fair and balanced, right? Well, what has actually happened is that Fox News was so blatant about its misinformation. And by the way, the story it tells every day is winking and nodding at the New World Order conspiracy theory, right? It's a world where white people are under attack by conspirators and criminal liberals.
For years, it's been the world where white people are under attack, to the point that in public polling, white people feel like they're more discriminated against than black people up until fairly recently, I think.
Right. And so the whole point is that you're always 24 hours away or one election away from everything being done. Right? The New World Order rolling in and UN troops taking over. Yeah. So that's been the story. But here's the problem. And this is also part of the issue, and this is on both sides. The mainstream media is really bad at explaining how reality works. Because everyone wants to pretend like reality is objective. You know what I mean? Like it's stable, and it's just left and right, Democrats and Republicans, and it just always stays in this very narrow reality. Fox News and the Republican Party have drug America kicking and screaming towards the right for years, to the point where we now have within legitimized fascism. The idea that like we should be embracing fascism, the idea that we should be sacrificing people for the good of the economy. We have senators who are writing op-eds about slaughtering people in the streets. We have a president who is an obvious authoritarian fascist. Well, what has happened? And this is actually the really terrifying thing. You want to talk about the toothpaste out of the thing. People who believe Fox News now don't see Fox News as right-wing or Republican. They see it as fair and balanced. They see Fox News as right in the middle. And if you listen to Donald Trump, and this is one of the more terrifying parts, he truly believes that Fox News is impartial. He thinks they're tough on him. He will come out and he'll say, I don't know what happened to Fox News, but they've been very tough on me lately. They are a designed propaganda network. This is one of the reasons why he's being courted and flirted with by OAN, which, by the way, doesn't even have the journalistic scruples that Fox News does. I mean, these people are, like, dangerous. They will come out and they will be like, the New World Order is on the march. I mean, they'll say the
I've never watched a minute of it. I'm too afraid to.
You should. Because I'm like their A block on all their shows is like Bill Gates is planning on putting Mark of the Beast.
Really? They do some. They do. Wow.
They do. No, they're out there, man. And so they, by the way, that's what Donald Trump wants. You know what I mean? He wants a network that will say the quiet part loud. And meanwhile, the Republican Party has been dragged and dragged and dragged, or I don't know, walked willfully or sprinted so far right that they're ready for whatever comes next. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing things like Breitbart and QAnon and all these alternate realities that are starting to poach away the people who used to watch Fox News and believe that they were, I don't know, patriotic, democratic citizens.
I feel like we have to stop calling them the Republican Party.
I completely agree.
What would you call them?
Well, here's
a Trumpist cult. there's no core beliefs about anything. Any quote conservative belief that I've been led to believe is a conservative belief over the last 15 years of doing this and learning, talking to conservatives and talking about it doesn't matter, because if Donald Trump says something or pronounces something against it, then they go wherever he goes. I mean, there's countless examples of that. So it's not the Republican Party. It's the whatever Trump says party, a cult.
I keep trying to explain this to people, that the core beliefs, the espoused beliefs of the Republican Party don't matter. They're not fiscally conservative. They're not socially conservative. They're not fiscally conservative. They're not pro-troops. They're not, pro-free markets. They're not pro-life. They're more than willing to throw
tax.
people. Well, that's sort of true. Because what they actually are is they're a malleable party. And that is the last step when you start to reach a fascistic authoritarian state, is when all of a sudden the principles of a party isn't like a non-moving platform. It's a platform that says, here are the rules and the law for us, and here are the rules and the law for you, which is a hierarchical society, which we've reached that point time and time again, where Bill Barr has not only shredded the rule of law, but he's promised to use law as a weapon against others, right? It's not for us, which is white supremacy. We don't actually need to be told what to do with our bodies and what to do with our money and all this stuff, but those people do, because they're dangerous, right? And so they need to be kept in order. So the Republican Party has a terminal case of authoritarian fascism. But it just so happens that we're still treating them like they're the grand old party or the party of Lincoln or whatever you want to call them. But they've changed. And I completely agree. The Republican Party has completely metamorphosized into something that most people can't recognize.
You keep calling Trump and Republicans fascists, and I actually don't give a shit what you call them. And maybe that word is applicable and maybe it isn't. But I do. I'm just interested to hear what you think, because I interviewed Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who's like an expert, a professor, an academic on authoritarianism, specifically fascism, Mussolini's, even more specifically Mussolini's fascism, which she wrote a book about. And I think what she says is we can't call it fascism because fascism traditionally is in reference to only having one political party in rule. And we do have another political party, which obviously these two parties have always kind of colluded to prevent a third party from ever being allowed to be at a debate, much less really exist in our country in any kind of meaningful way. But we do have a strong Democratic Party, which will hopefully get a lot stronger in November and even maybe take back the Senate. So is it really fascism, as she would say, if there are two political parties, or still I would say a robust resistance, and maybe you would argue otherwise, that's still in existence?
I would make the argument that because we're in a long-form podcast versus Twitter, maybe what we would call them is aspirational fascist. Okay. Right? That's what they want. They literally want to wipe the Democratic Party out.
Yeah, that's a much better, that's a good caveat or a good
So if you actually take a look at how fascism started to rise up, it takes place in these time periods where there are alternatives, right? It just so happens that there are people who are out in the world and they're telling you, they're like, if you put us in power, believe me, we are going to have sole power. And people are like, I don't believe them. They're not going to be that bad. Like, who could ever possibly do that? It's like that old idea of, it's like when people show you who they are, believe them. The Republican Party is telling you if they had their way, there would be a one-party rule, and perhaps they would splinter or something along those lines. But there's also another element to this that we haven't necessarily touched on. We've sort of danced around it. We talked about the cult of the Shining City. We talked about the evangelical right. This government is filled through. So the Republican Party, so you have some old Republican, traditionalists like a Mitch McConnell who's just interested in legislative power, right? You have Trump who's interested in dismantling government as a way to expedite, profit and power. But then you have a ton of these like Christian nationalists, right? You have your Pompeos, your Barrs, your Pences, who literally their religion is that they think that America and the rest of the world needs to be a theocratic state. They truly believe that every law and every way that a country works should go exactly based on Christian law, which, by the way, for people who haven't connected the dots yet, it is the other side of the coin of Sharia law. The thing that they've been wanting to fight and they've been wanting to go after, they've always been talking about these religious extremists around the world. It's like another crusade type situation.
Yeah, I call them the American Taliban.
I think that's exactly right. And that's what these people are interested in. So you actually have this weird, shambling, zombie-like political party that used to be the party of Lincoln or the Conservative Party, and it's turned into a bunch of people who want to suppress other voices.
And by the way, the Taliban has a real pedophilia thing, little boys thing in the Taliban, and so does American Christianity. From the Catholic Church, the evangelicals, which is why it might explain some of their obsession with this idea that there's a global pedophile ring, which is just so, bizarre for so many different reasons. But I'm not saying secular, non-religious, non-Christians can't prey on kids. They do all the time. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that there's a preponderance of it with religious people. And I don't have the statistics to prove it. So maybe it's wrong. But that's what it seems to be to me.
Well, I was actually talking about QAnon. Man, what is time during a pandemic? Am I right? I want to say it was like yesterday or the day before. I was doing some thing, and I was talking about it. QAnon, this whole idea of talking about human trafficking and, child sex rings and all that, those things exist. Those are real, right?
I've covered them. I've talked to experts about them. Absolutely, they're real.
And by the way,
especially in the Boy Scouts of America and the Catholic Church, but I digress.
And here's the thing. Do you know who traffics in that stuff? Wealthy and powerful people. So again, what you have is when you say who traffics in that stuff, you're saying the people who generally pay for or prey on kids or wealth. The people who are parts of this are... Right, they're people of wealth and power and influence. Well, so there is what's at the heart of all these conspiracy theories. There's always a nugget of truth at the heart of every conspiracy theory, right? That then sort of dominoes away, and all of a sudden you're trying to explain it. So now it just so happens that, you have Donald Trump, who is a personal friend of Epstein, and tailed around with him and all this stuff. We have no idea what happened. And people would then obviously answer back with, well, what about this person? What about this person? I don't think it's a political issue. I think these people should be punished and these things should be broken up.
Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton. Yeah, it doesn't matter. By the way, I don't care what your political party is or your religious. If you were palling around, if you're trafficking in this kind of stuff, it's bad. That's what being nonpartisan means. I don't care what your background is.
But that is the difference. Because what we're talking about is equal protection under the law, right? So if somebody that I admired...
Or equal coverage in media.
Right. If somebody that I supported or admired or voted for got found out to actually be a part of something like this, my initial reaction would be horror, and then I would be like, I was wrong about that person, and they should be punished. Right. So here's the problem, though. This entire thing, we're talking about QAnon, we're talking about these conspiracy theories, that sprouted up in order to protect people like Donald Trump, to turn them into infallible leaders who could never do anything possibly wrong and were actually fighting the whole thing, right? And it's all about that cognitive dissonance and trying to put yourself in sort of a mindset where all the contradictory evidence, it doesn't matter because there's all this miracle, magical thinking happening all the time. It's a cult. These things are cults.
How do you talk with... Do you engage people who believe in this stuff? Like you said, your family members. Is there a strategy? Is there an effort? Is it a waste of time?
Well, okay, so that's a big question. So my family, so I started covering the Trump campaign in 2016. That was when I started sounding the alarm. I was going into these rallies, and because I'm a white dude with a beard who walks around in jeans and boots, they would tell me what they actually thought. They were openly racist and openly fascist.
Yeah, I got it too at the RNC. I got the same treatment. I have the same head.
Too.
Not the same head, but an acceptable head. Yes.
Right. And so that happened to me at the RNC too, which was just a horror show. And so I kept telling people, I was trying to sound the alarm, and everyone's like, oh, don't be an alarmist. That's not true. And I'm like, no, they're talking about locking people up, murdering people, taking over government, executing people, all this stuff. Well, then... as I'm reporting on this, all of a sudden I start getting attacked by neo-Nazis, white supremacists, people showing up at my house in the middle of the night, real horror show stuff. My family, meanwhile, I would tell them about this and they're like, oh, those aren't Trump supporters. There's no way. There's no way those are Trump supporters. I was like, you've misread this situation, right? And they want Trump because again, and people have analyzed this over and over and over, he was the middle finger or the warrior against like establishment stuff, right? Which it makes sense, but he also played upon their inherent prejudices. What I found is this. I can only have honest conversations with my family who supports Trump or people who support Trump when I make an offering. And that offering is this. So I'm not registered to either party. I gave up any registration I had with the Democratic Party when I wrote this book, American Rule, and I started looking at the history of American politics, right? Like, and as I say that, I'm telling you, I will break my hand voting for Joe Biden in November, you know? Like, but that doesn't mean that I think the Democratic Party is perfect by any means.
Right.
I have problems with the Democratic Party. I have a detailed list of complaints and things that I would really like to see from the Democratic Party, right? Before I ever called myself a Democrat. Well, think about when you talk to a Trump supporter, right? And you're like, oh, he's corrupt or whatever. And then they're like, yeah, what about Bill Clinton? And immediately you can either go back and forth with headlines, right? The whataboutism.
Right.
But what I do that actually works is I'm like, yeah, he's not perfect at all, and I have real problems with Bill Clinton.
Same.
And when you say that, it short wires them. You know what I mean? Like, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, we're not in trenches. Oh, well, yeah, I'll admit Trump's kind of problematic too. And all of a sudden you're not pundits on CNN's Crossfire. All of a sudden you're human beings who are several rungs down from power, right? And all of a sudden you're commiserating because I'll tell you what, my family were staunch FDR Democrats, you know? Like, if you went into my family, like my grandmother's house, there would be like the commemorative plates with like JFK and FDR and all this stuff. And she would tell you the Republican Party is the party of the rich man and they screwed us over in the Great Depression, all this stuff. Well, guess what changed? A lot of things changed and the parties realigned and all of a sudden it becomes about where the jobs are, why the jobs got taken away, who's supporting me, who's saying that I'm not a victim or I have systemic privilege or whatever. So like all these things realign, but at the down court, they don't trust anybody. You know, they know Donald Trump is untrustworthy. They know he's a buffoon. And when we're not in trenches and we're not trading these, these ready-made internet talking points, we can actually have a conversation. And I've seen progress there. That actually does help.
I guess last question for you, because I told you about 40 minutes or so, but I mean, how do you articulate the mask issue? I just watched this crazy video where was this? I forget what state was this in. Some guy goes into a convenience store and the guy behind the counter is like, can't serve you don't have a mask. Some 75-year-old guy starts telling him, put your mask on. And the dude stabs the 75-year-old guy in the store. Then leaves. Police chase him down, and he gets out of the car and goes after the police officer with a knife, and she shoots him dead. There's a video of it, and it's like the mask. The idea that you don't want to wear a mask. This guy sounded actually mentally ill and it sounded like he was actually suicidal. Wanted to suicide by cop. I can't see it any other way. Maybe I could be wrong, but that's just one example of it. We're seeing these examples all over the country, people fist fighting over masks. The preponderance of people, I think, want to wear them, but far too many don't. And it's actually enough of a percentage, especially in certain parts of the country, where, the science proves that if enough people aren't going to wear it, it doesn't matter that the rest of us are. How do you describe the behavior and the attitude of those people who don't want to wear the mask? How is that a thing?
There's a few things going on. So I wrote a book a few years ago that was all about masculinity in America and why men behave the way they do. On one hand, wearing a mask for a lot of insecure men is like a signal, which is I'm afraid and insecure, which these people are terrified, but they don't want to admit it, right? So on one hand, this is so lame, but it's true. If we got a whole lot more Harley Davidson masks and masks with flames on them and barbed wire on them, oh my God, people would do that, like get out there.
What about, dude, I just solved it. How about a holster mask? Just a holster for your gun. You wear your gun on your face.
Done.
Because the opposite of... They don't want to wear a mask because what you're saying, I want to read that book. I'm fascinated with that subject, and I think about it all the time. You don't want to wear a mask because it's a sign of weakness. Yes. But you do want to wear a gun because that's a sign of strength.
Right. And here's the problem.
It's also a sign of fear and weakness.
And by the way, this is actually one of the things that I'm actually so frustrated that people don't talk about and that nobody has like put their finger on yet. Here is America in a nutshell in terms of the mask debate. Okay? I don't know if you remember, but when they first started talking about wearing masks, all of a sudden it was like, hey, the mask doesn't protect you from coronavirus. And all of a sudden it's actually about I wear a mask for you and you wear a mask for me, right? So all of a sudden what it actually is it short circuits because of game theory. And these people, and again, this is one of the things with Trump, right? The world is winners or losers.
Everything's binary.
Right? So if I wear a mask, there's nothing in it for me. I'm the winner because I show that I'm stronger than you, but you wearing the mask actually protects me. So it's actually a broken down game theory idea. Here's one of the things that I think we should start doing. And actually, I was really proud to see this. Not proud, but I was really happy to see it. I believe it was the commissioner of the SEC football conference, right? And he said, hey, if you want football, you need to wear masks. And immediately it's like, oh, wait, I can get something if I wear a mask? You know what I mean? Because it's not like the economy isn't still shut down. People are still doing the jobs. There's no necessary economic incentive because the states probably are not going to shut down. But if you start giving people, it's like, well, do you want the NFL this year? Do you want this stuff? And I know that is like surface level appeals, but if people actually want to make a difference, it needs to give people an incentive to buy
I like
in.
that idea, but I just don't know how it waters down to also if you want a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread, you got to wear a mask in the store too. I'm not wearing it. Well, then you can't have the milk or bread. I mean, it's like you want football, you'll wear a mask, but what about sustenance? You won't wear a mask? Like it seems different on a kind of a more personal one-to-one level.
There's a primal level to it. Because what we're talking about without talking about is we're actually talking about the idea of a shared society and freedom.
Yes, that's what I was going to get to.
Well, and that's the problem is in America, we think we understand freedom and shared society. We don't. We think that freedom means we can do whatever we want at any given time. But that's not actually how shared society works. And we're actually reaching this crisis point. And again, this is late in the podcast to get into it, but we have to. We have actually reached a point where the reality of America that everybody thought they had, the quote-unquote consensus, right? We're talking about history, the way America has worked and what history is. That whole thing was a lie. That whole thing was based on intimidation and oppression of people of color.
And that's what your whole book is about, and so good and so heartbreaking, but yet important to read. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so what's actually happening is we're seeing a fracturing of the consensus, which is actually the real reality. The real reality is that America hasn't worked the way that we've pretended it has, and that freedom was never actually freedom. It was actually oppression of other people. So like that is fundamentally fatal to people's idea of reality. And the reason they're pissed off is because the reality they thought they knew is dissipating. It's going away, and they are going to fight it.
Can I ask you one more, though, about that specifically? It does seem like in America, unlike other countries, we have more speech to the point now where the right, unfortunately, has said that money is speech, but I don't want to get into that. But the idea that we do have these freedoms of speech. Yesterday, the president defended flying the Confederate flag as a form of speech, which I agree with, actually. I do agree with that. I'm just saying there should be consequences. And at a private event or in a state capitol, NASCAR can decide, and so can the state of Mississippi, to take that flag down. But if I wanted to put it out front of my house, that might be something different, although the community might decide on that. Again, that being said, what do you make of the idea of, the Barry Weisses of the world or kind of the right complaining that we can't say what we want to say anymore, and that we've even lost these freedoms of speech that we once celebrated somewhat uniquely? Was that a myth too?
That's never existed. I mean, John Adams. Let's go back to John Adams's time at the turn, from the 18th to the 19th century. He passed a law that said that anybody who spoke ill of him could be deported or could be arrested. That was like from the very beginning. So hold
on, I have audio of that actually. I can't find it.
Yeah, and by the way, not to mention, there was kind of a thing. What was that? Oh, yeah, that's right. There were people who didn't have any freedoms at the founding of this country. That's right. It was the slaves, right? And or women, for that matter, now that we're talking about it, and everybody else was oppressed into silence. So no, America has never actually had true freedom of speech. It just so happens that these people, the conversation they're having is a lie. What they're having a conversation about is capitalism and the market. They're saying, there might be a monetary punishment for the things that I might see. And actually what they want is they want widespread acclaim, and they want to be rewarded for it. I think Barry Weiss resigned from an incredibly lucrative gig at one of the world's most prestigious and, most read papers in the world. They didn't ask her to leave. They don't even really edit their editorial writers. I mean, she could just kept putting that out. She did it because she wants to capitalize on a future media investment. I believe Andrew Sullivan and probably Ben Shapiro are going to join her on that. So actually what we're talking about is not freedom of speech. We're talking about freedom of profit. We're talking about being free of monetary consequences. I'm of the same mind. If people want to go out and fly a Confederate flag, by all means, it's a flag, it's a symbol, it's a metaphor. I hold that at the same level as being able to burn a flag. But guess what? If your community wants to treat you differently because you want to fly a flag that is a metaphor for white supremacy, that's kind of how society works. You make decisions, and then society makes decisions about how they're going to treat you. And that's unfortunately what happens in a shared society, and it doesn't always treat everyone well.
I'll let it end right there because I want to let you go, and I could keep talking for hours. I love your stuff. I'm so happy to finally get you here in conversation. I look forward to the next session. Thank you so much for joining me, Jared.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it so much.
What did you think? Jared Sexton. How about having that guy on a regular basis? Blew my mind. Thank you, Tina Winsett, for turning me on to him and reminded me to get him back on the show. Absolutely get his book, listen to his podcast, and he is a brilliant, honest, thoughtful, well-researched, credible voice when it comes to all of the issues that I love to talk about here on the show. I hope you'll follow him. I hope you will tell him that you heard him right here on the podcast at JY Sexton. At the top of the show, I forgot to plug the paid subscription opportunity that you have. Do you know that you have the opportunity to support this daily podcast with a paid subscription? Have I ever mentioned that? Just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes, or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up there for as little as $5 or as much as $1,000. You can spend $1,000 on a subscription. A couple of people actually have done that. 2 people, I think. Got like 4 or 5 people paying $100. I think one guy paying $150. Is it? Amazing. Unbelievable. You guys are the best. Sustaining this podcast and allowing for me to produce it each and every day. And it's just me. So I appreciate your support. Thank you very much. All right, coming up now, as I promised, the eyes of the nation are on Florida and what happens down there with the coronavirus and with the opening of schools. No better people to talk to than the leaders of the Florida Education Association. The president is Fed Ingram. The vice president is Andrew Spar. I've worked with these guys in Florida in a number of different events. I have nothing but support for them and respect for them. Really good men of integrity, great leaders, and inspiring dudes. I'm really happy to have them joining the show. Here's our conversation. All right, here they are right now. I've got them on Zoom. I'll try to get this video out as well as the audio. Fed, Andrew, thank you very much for joining me today.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely. Great being here.
The president and vice president, first of all, I just want to say, when we were together back in November, I thought your dynamic was so great, the way that you all worked together. It's clear, obviously, the Fed is the president, but he clearly trusts and respects everything Andrew, you, and everybody else says. There's a really good working relationship, but I didn't want to say anything then. It just did seem weird when Fed made you do 20 squat thrusts, Andrew, and I wonder if me bringing it up right now is awkward. Andrew?
It's not awkward. It's the whole idea of making sure that we look out for each other and our health. And
but I know, Fed, physical fitness is an important issue for you, but it seemed a little militaristic of you to be ordering us to exercise that way.
Hey, listen, I'm just still impressed that you guys can do 20 squats. That is awesome.
That's what it was about, really. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I mean, do you feel like the eyes of the nation are on you? Because I feel like they are. I've been working with you guys for a long time and so impressed with the work that you do, the challenges that you've been trying to overcome despite these amazing obstacles for a state like Florida and educators in Florida. but the eyes of the nation are on you because you guys go back to school really early in the year, mid-August, and you have the highest spike in COVID that I think we've seen at this point. Fed, does it feel like we're all watching you to see what decisions the schools and government are going to make with you first?
Yeah, so it does, and so being a state that's surrounded on three sides by water, I will just tell you, we are truly in the fishbowl right now. We are being watched for all the wrong reasons, for lack of leadership, for irresponsible reopenings, and for this careless thought process in reopening our schools. We have one of the highest positivity rates in the nation. Our death count rises every day. We've had, in fact, in the next couple of days, we will be over 300,000 positive cases in COVID.
So, Andrew, same question. I mean, just want you to add to each other's answers as much as you guys want to here. But you guys go back to school normally, August 14th? That's the date you would go back to school. What do you guys phrase to use? The normal times, the old days?
Yeah. Yeah, the start date here in Florida is August 10th for most of our districts. And so it's not that far away anymore. And Fed may have not seen the new numbers. Florida has exceeded 300,000 cases as of today. We had our second highest number of deaths in a single day today. But let me share some other numbers as it relates to schools. And we're talking about this, because this is staggering. We keep hearing that, this doesn't impact kids that much. We're not concerned about kids getting COVID. We're not concerned about them transmitting. We hear that from non-medical professionals. But the numbers say otherwise. So Florida went lockdown, right? We did similar to what New York did. We went lockdown in March of the last school year, so just a few months ago. And in March, we locked down, we shut down our schools, we canceled all after-school activities. My girls didn't go to dance. The Taekwondo place was closed. All of these things shut down, and kids were home for the most part. And in June, the governor said, look, we've got to get kids out of the house. We got to open up summer camps. We got to get our summer school programs open. We got to get our schools back open. We've got to open up things for kids again. So before the governor did that, there were 3,400 cases in Florida with kids under the age of 18 who tested positive for COVID. There were under 10%, well under 10%, who tested positive out of our kids under the age of 18. And there was 103 kids who were hospitalized and no deaths. That's through mid-June, from March through mid-June. From the middle of June to now, the middle of July, we have had an additional 13,600 kids under the age of 18 test positive. We've had 110 kids end up in the hospital in 1 month. And we've had 4 deaths. And the positive rate went from under 10% to over 31%. So if we're saying kids don't get this, we opened up our summer school programs, we opened up camps, and all of a sudden we have this explosion of cases among our kids. And so that's very concerning for teachers and for us in the education world. And that should give us pause on what are we about to do if we open schools like normal, like our governor has said we should do, like the president of the United States says we should do. What does that mean for those kids and for parents come August 10th?
Now, Andrew, I've met both your daughters, and Fed, you have a daughter who's in school as well. So no one, you guys are both the president and vice president of the Florida Educators Association, but also you have kids in school in Florida. So do so many of the educators themselves. So the argument that you don't want to open schools is bizarre. You are the schools. You two guys are the schools. You represent the schools. You represent the teachers. You represent the buildings. You both have made arguments your whole careers for why school's important, especially as we're calling it brick and mortar school. You both understand learning at home and how that works as well. But Fed, having a kid in the school, they can't use that against you. What are they, what are the arguments that they're making about you guys, your organization, and teachers in general?
So here's what I think our governor is being led by: politics and the economy. And that should, our governor has tied himself directly to the president of the United States. And, on this very same day that the president gave this bombastic tweet, we must open schools in the fall. on the very same day, our governor and commissioner of education came out with an executive order and said, you know what, we will have a brick and mortar option for all parents in the state of Florida. Hell or high water, no matter what. And so they have this careless approach. And here's what I've been telling the governor and everybody else who listen. You can be reckless with bars. You can be reckless with restaurants. You can even be reckless with beaches, and you get what you get. But you're going to be reckless with our public schools, 2.8 million children, over 200,000 employees, my wife and my daughter. You're going to be reckless with those folks who are going to try to get an education. Not on our watch. That's what listen, teachers want to be in school more than anybody else.
Right.
That's what we do. First grade teachers, they want to get, they get giddy this time of year. They're the only people in America who actually have this zeal to go back to school. They start planning. They start going to spend their own money. They start to, try to get these creative ideas going about what they're going to do, theme their classes out. This is the time of year teachers normally start to do that. But they're in panic mode right now. So much so that we've had teachers that are going into early retirements. We've had teachers that started to fill out wills. Living wills, Pete. They literally are filling out their will because they must go back to school because they got to pay their bills. But they know that they're going in with a state that is going to underfund them, that is not going to give them the PPE that they need, and that is not putting in the funding that is going to take to operate our public school.
Who are the sides here? When you say politics, like I understand to a certain extent why people want kids to go to school so they can go to work and so everybody can make money and so the economy can hum along, because politically unemployment looks terrible. When the economy's bad, that looks terrible. But what about, like, who are the interests there in Florida, much less the rest of the country? You've got the educators, you've got parents, and then you've got the governor, and what it would seem in Florida and a lot of other states, the counties making piecemeal policy. So who are the sides? Who are the interests, Andrew?
So look, it's
I'm not
everyone,
trying to
right?
make it binary. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make it, but I'm trying to understand the arguments.
So let's look at it from there's sides all over, right? I mean, realistically, first of all, there's within us, right? Every teacher, as Fed said, wants to get back to school. What's tearing at our heartstrings is that we know, I mean, and quite honestly, COVID has got the governor and the president and other people saying, yes, public schools are vitally important. We haven't heard that in a long time, right? We should be opening our public schools.
Yeah.
Educators want that too. Educators want to be back in school. So what's tearing at their heartstrings is we know the best place for kids is in our schools. But at the same time, we want them to be safe. And so at the same time, what's tearing at us is we know it's not safe right now. So how do we balance that? Parents are the same way. Is it safe to send my kids back or not? Then you have parents who have to go to work and they're like, look, I've got to go to work. My job is saying you must come in. If you don't make money. I can't stay at home with my kid. What happens there? Then you have a governor who early on said, we've got to open schools up, and the president too, because it matters to the economy. The economy can't recover unless we open schools up. So as Fed was saying, absolutely, it's about building the economy, get schools open. So if there's two sides, it's do we open schools because we know it's the best place for kids to learn and we need to get the economy going? And then there's the politics, of course. Or do we have schools in a virtual setting because we want to make sure it's safe? The CDC has said a high-risk situation to pack kids into a classroom. It's a high-risk situation. And in Florida, we're not saying let's limit the number. Heck, Disney World. The commissioner of the secretary of education, Betsy DeVos, was on the news this weekend. She was on CNN, and she said that schools should look at the private sector and see what they did. So Disney, let's look at Disney for a minute. I know, Pete, there's a special place in your heart.
Yeah, take it easy. Take it easy.
So let's look at Disney. Disney opened at a fraction of the number of people they would normally have in the park. There, you can only get in if you have a reservation. They are limiting how many people come in. Then if you go in, everyone has to wear a mask. There's no option. You must wear a mask. Their employees are wearing masks and face shields. Then they sanitize everything at least every 2 hours. They have hand washing stations and sanitary stations all over the place. They're requiring you to distance 6 feet. Everyone knows Disney is famous for long lines. Now imagine 6 feet in between all the people waiting in line. That's what Disney has done. Our school boards are meeting this week. They've been meeting yesterday. Some of them are meeting today. Some of them meet Thursday. School boards throughout Florida are meeting. Half of them are meeting virtually. The other half are meeting in situations where they're socially distanced or not letting the public in. They have to watch via video. They can't come into the actual meeting room. And they're spacing out 6 feet. But then they're saying, but we're not going to do that with the kids. And the kicker here, the State Board of Education met today. Fed and I were watching this earlier. The governor was there. The commissioner was there. They had everyone spaced out 6 feet. And they had someone who was cleaning the podium anytime someone came to the podium.
Looks terrible.
We're
terrible.
not doing that in the schools.
Right. You're not. You couldn't do that in schools because you wouldn't. I mean, you won't be able to because there's so many more kids. Especially we can talk about the packed classrooms in Florida. Through my work with you guys, I've learned so much about educators, specifically educators in Florida, and the amazing spirit and dedication that they all have. But I've also learned that you are a right to work state, or as we say, right to work for less state, meaning organized labor in your state has very little power. It's really hard for your union, your organizations to get members, keep members, and do what, traditionally organized labor does. So what can you do? What are you prepared to do, Fed? Can't teachers just say, listen, if you don't make the decisions that we agree to, we're not going to show up. So what are you going to do?
So we have some of the most egregious laws in the country as it relates to strikes or withholding labor. Nothing is off the table for us, but here's where we are. Our teachers are making decisions every single day. They are going into other fields. They are deciding that they're going to take sabbaticals or leave of absences. And some are just retiring because they either can't because they are over the age of 60, or they have an underlying issue, or they might be a healthy teacher. They might be a healthy teacher who's taking care of an elderly parent or who's taking care of a sick child at home. And they don't want to be the person who is the carrier to that particular person. So I think what we do as a collective effort is we continue to put pressure on this governor. We have hit the media waves in a way that we haven't in a really long time to try and put pressure on this governor. We are actually having protests, but we're having safe protests. So we're having car caravans all across this state. In fact, just this week, we had about 10 caravans where in Orange County, where Disney World is, we had over 250 cars that were circling around politicians' offices and school board meetings so that they know exactly what's going on. And we're increasing that pressure statewide as we go. So just because we can't strike doesn't mean we don't do anything. We do a lot. And listen, legal action is on the table as well for us. So we're not going to leave any stone unturned. We're going to let these folks know. And at the end of the day, the ultimate thing that we all can do in this entire democracy is vote. And so those voting ideas are coming. Those voting rights are coming up and going to be on full display in August and in November. And if a politician is saying, hell or high water, we're going to open up these schools and we don't care about your health and safety, then we can do something about that. Because we are the electorate, we're the people, and our governor needs to tie himself to the people and not to the president, because we've gotten no leadership from Trump nor from Betsy DeVos.
Yeah, you guys are, like you said, you don't have the power, but you certainly have the passion and the creativity to get around the obstacles that are in your way there with the situation in Florida and organized labor. But you guys obviously aren't sitting there saying, no, we're not going to do what you tell us to do. You have solutions. You're not acting like the party of no. What are the proposals? I mean, it's got to be so hard for you guys. I don't know how you can relax. I'm sure you probably haven't, because you're just constantly trying to think about strategy, and you don't know. Nobody's ever been in this situation. You don't know what's best or what's safe. And I would argue that there aren't any really good choices, because we know what the optimal way to learn is, and it was already hard in your overcrowded classrooms with your underpaid teachers in Florida. So what are your proposals, gentlemen, for what you should do, and how confident can you even be in your own ideas, not knowing what, as you laid out, Andrew, the statistics about this virus and what it might actually do with young people?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, first of all, throughout our state, as I said, school boards are meeting. They're trying to figure this out. We've got a governor who's issued an executive order saying schools will be open at least 5 days a week, brick and mortar, but there's some flexibility, arguably. But then school boards are meeting, and they're actually being told by superintendents, by others, if you don't open schools on time the way we're saying to open them, that's what the governor is saying, the governor may remove you from office. That's being said to school board members. So there's chaos. As Fed said, there hasn't been leadership at the national level. There hasn't been leadership at the state level. There's been chaos. And that's what we're seeing. And so there's a lot of angst among teachers, among parents, among students about what do we do? And so here's what we've said, very simple. One, we should look at what the CDC is saying. We, FEA, put together a task force under Fed's leadership of educators, of medical doctors and medical professionals, of mental health professionals and others. And we talked to them, parents and community. What should we do? And so here's what we said. We said, one, cases in the community should be under 10%. That's the positive rate should be under 10%. That's what the CDC is saying. That's what medical experts are saying. If it is above 10%, you have massive community spread, and opening schools is irresponsible. It's reckless, as Fed was saying before. Two, when we open schools, and this is school buildings, we can do online learning. Let's not forget that. It's not ideal, but it works in this situation. When we open schools, we have to make sure things are in place. How are we going to do buses? You know, what they've said in some counties is instead of 3 kids in a seat on a bus, meaning they're shoulder to shoulder crammed into a small little bus bench seat. We all have been on school buses. We know that. Yep. We'll do 2 kids in a seat, which means there's 12 inches between them. But that's not 6 feet of social distancing. How do we handle the busing? Do we add more bus routes? Do we reduce the number of kids on the buses? That's a big question. Then when they get to school, are we taking temperatures? Are we limiting who's coming on campuses so that it's not just, we don't have parents coming on campuses they typically might, or volunteers, that it's just the kids and staff to really minimize the potential of spread? What happens when kids are there? Are we making sure they're not eating in the cafeteria, or we reduce the number of people in the cafeteria? How do we handle class changes to reduce kids in the hallways? We have some ideas about how you do that. For example, hallways should be one way. Class time should be staggered to reduce the number of kids in there. Maybe teachers are moving to classrooms, but there's a lot to be discussed in all of this. And then, of course, how do you handle the playground for your kindergarten and first graders, your elementary kids? Yeah. How do you handle that situation? How are you sanitizing equipment? Do you have hands-free hand sanitizers in the hallway? More soap? You know what teachers do at the beginning of every year? They buy supplies. You know what some of those supplies are? You've probably seen this, Pete, when your daughters, especially in elementary school, when they came home with a supply list, what was on that supply list? Clorox wipes, Lysol wipes, right? Something like that. You can't even find them in the store right now. And certainly schools have never supplied them at the level they need. How are we going to handle that? So those are those are concrete questions that have to be answered. And then what do you do if someone has COVID? Do you shut the whole school down and move everyone to virtual learning for 14 days so they can quarantine? Is it just that classroom? How do you contact trace the people who got it? There needs to be a clear plan. I can tell you in Florida, it does not exist in any school district right now because there's been no guidance, zero guidance from the Department of Education in Florida or at the national level. And more importantly, there's been no real funding to address that.
Hold on 1 second. Can someone bring me some Xanax? Do we have Xanax here? We don't have any. No, I'm just hearing some really... Fed, what would you add to that?
So listen, I want to add just a couple things. One of the most important things is we have to talk about the physical structure of the school. Mm-hmm. We have to talk about the ventilation system. We know that we are talking about airborne droplets, right? We're talking about changing filters, changing the oxygenation in some of these classes in our buildings. Some of our buildings are dilapidated and have not had responsible reconstruction in over 40 years, over 50 years. Some of them have air conditioning units that have mold. Some of them have all kinds of already airborne germs that we have every day. What do you do with band classes? And you know that you're going to have droplets there, right? And do we try to change the pressure to try and pipe down some of the spray of the aerosols that are going on? What do you do with chorus classes? Are they going to have chorus outside? Because we know yelling and singing is one way to have a pretty big community spread. And so those are the kinds of things, do we have assemblies? Do we cut assemblies out altogether?
Oh, yeah.
Cut out altogether? right? So those are some of the things that we need to talk about that we really have not drilled down to. Our commissioner and our governor just said full steam ahead. You guys, good luck. That's what we're doing here in Florida, in the middle of a crisis.
The commissioner of education?
Yes.
As part of the DeSantis administration.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, bet neither.
Who's never taught in the classroom either. Never has no education background.
Unlike both of you who do. But have you ever had to deal with filtration systems? Has it always been an issue? Has it been an issue in the past if they had mold? And because I'm just guessing that you probably were never prepared to have to deal so much with the actual infrastructure, but you probably have, because for a long time these schools have been dilapidated, especially in the more impoverished areas, I'm guessing. So I think I just answered my own question, didn't I?
Yeah, that's right. You'd be surprised how many people can trace cancer, bronchial issues, all kinds of breathing situations from being in a school over 10, 15, 20 years that had mold, dilapidated buildings, had corroded cement, had asbestos up until about 15, 20 years ago. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we've had to deal with for a really long time.
So you guys
I'll tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you, Pete. Sorry. I negotiated language, I'm sure Fed did too, on mold eradication in classrooms and what you do in those kinds of situations. A lot of our students and a lot of adults here in Florida deal with asthma, and so mold makes it worse. And so, yes, when you are trying to save money in school districts, they shut air conditioning units off in the summer. You come back in the heat of the month of August when we return here to Florida, and you put those air conditionings on and they're blowing all kinds of stuff. So it is a very real concern for so many kids and employees in our schools.
I think they should have the governor of Florida go in and turn them on himself, and then forced to be he should have to stand in front of them and sleep in front of them. Anyway, what are you hearing from your members? Because you're in constant communication with your members and kind of the way that the leadership works, and the Florida Education Association, I guess it's by each county, has their own president, I think is my understanding, which is where you used to be in Volusia County, I think, Andrew, right, where you ran that one. And now you're working at the state level with FEA. So what are you hearing from your members? There must be so much confusion and so much chaos and concern. I mean, you must be just fielding questions and emails all day long. Andrew or Fed? Because Andrew was the last to speak. That's how I do it here on the show.
That's right.
Plus, you're the president. I don't want anybody to have to do jumping jacks.
That's good classroom training there. There you go. So listen, I will tell you the two biggest issues that I hear, and we talk to members every day via email, via phone, and we have conference calls all the time. Fear is one. I've never seen such fear in teachers who are just simply getting ready to go back to school, and anger, because they're frankly insulted that they are not being offered the PPE that we know will keep them safe. There are schools and school districts who are not offering masks, who are not offering face shields. And they know that this is, the one thing that we can do. Well, two things that we can do is social distance, and we can protect ourselves. And they're not having that. So those are the two resounding issues. Listen, my wife is getting ready to go back to school, and
she's a teacher.
She's a teacher. She's an English teacher, and listen. The amount of conversations that I hear that I'm probably not supposed to hear, because I get reminded all the time that I better do my job so that things will be better in our school. But I will tell you, some of the conversations that I'm hearing directly from not only her colleagues and her friends, but from around the state, is just, do we matter? Do we care? Do people care about the work that we're doing? Do they care? This is life or death now. This is not even about underfunding schools or tests or, what a student's going to learn. This is life or death. You may come home and there is a potential for you not to be here on the planet if you are simply trying to do your job.
We saw that. We saw that out in Arizona, where a teacher who was teaching summer school, there were 3 teachers. They all got sick with COVID. One of them passed away. I'll tell you, I want to talk about something else real quick on this, because Fed's right. And, my wife as well is a teacher. And so, and she's a music teacher like Fed was. And so, there is that question about how are we going to do this work in a safe way? But in Volusia County, where I live, there was actually a preschool program this summer, what they call VPK, Voluntary Pre-K program. 5 kids. After 3 days, one kid did not come to school, and the parents said, oh, he has an ear infection, or she. And that Monday, the child was diagnosed with COVID. And on that Monday, another kid was absent, and another kid came to school with a mask on, and the mask was covering up a runny nose. And so they shut the program down. That's an example. We have a football program. Football. You talk about the NBA is getting ready to start up. They've created a bubble so that they're trying to keep people from getting into the bubble so that COVID stays out if they create this bubble. But you've got high school football is huge here in Florida, as are marching bands. How do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, you've got the NCAA already, several divisions saying we're going to reduce schedules. We're going to protect our kids and kind of create a bubble around the kids. We have the NFL right now. Fed was talking about this the other day. The NFL and the Players Association are negotiating. We don't know where that's going to end up, but we're talking about high school sports. Those programs are back at it already in Florida. One school district, a football program, at least one child was diagnosed with COVID. They suspended the whole program. Right here near me, another kid they were in small team exercise groups. So they've now isolated 10 kids from the football team.
They're playing football right now in Florida. They're
practicing. Summer practice.
Yeah, and now more counties are starting to suspend fall sports. So my daughter is a volleyball player, and she was trying out for a high school team. One kid, and they were social distancing, and I went to the practice and made sure, now it's very difficult to do that, and it was more volley than ball. And because, you're simply just not getting the full experience because people are trying to be safe. Yeah. But one kid where I live in Leon County was diagnosed, and so they shut all summer programs down. Listen, we've got to just recalibrate. We got to rethink this thing. We got to get our governor to believe in science. We got to get our governor to do his job and provide some leadership and get the numbers down, get the positivity rate down, get our ICU beds down, get our hospital usage under control. We have hospitals that are out of control. They don't have beds. They're at 100% capacity. Miami-Dade, West Palm Beach, Orange County, Pinellas. We have 100% capacity in ICU beds in many of our hospitals across the state of Florida. And our governor is looking away and putting his head in the sand like an ostrich and saying there's nothing to see here. This is just the hypocrisy that we see in trying to deal with the economy and deal with politics and not dealing with this with grace and compassion. One kid, one teacher, one cafeteria worker, one bus driver who loses their life is too many for something that we could have stopped one way or another if we just simply do the right thing.
That's not what a lot of people in America think. They don't think they think that's just part of this situation. Get used to it. People are going to die. We have to live our lives. I mean, that's what a lot of people have said without beating around the bush.
So, let me also say this, Pete, because, in Florida, we were doing pretty good early on. You may remember, since you're in New York, we're in Florida, our governor said anyone coming from New York needs to self-isolate and literally put up checkpoints on 95 and I-10 for people coming in from Louisiana and people coming in from New York. Literally did that. You came in on the airport, you were greeted here in Florida.
Right, because the New Orleans outbreak. Yeah.
Right. Now it's reversed, right? And it's reversed because what Florida did is they decided we can go back to normal. And he gloated on the fact nothing happened in Florida like people said. We kept the numbers down. We shut down the state for the most part, right? And he said it's time to get back open. And although he said we were doing it in phases, they pretty much looked the other way and said, do what you want. And so we had restaurants open back up and bars open back up and gyms open back up and summer programs and camps and all these things. Everyone pretty much opened back up with limited restriction. He's taken a small step back, but he still wants to push forward because at the end of the day, it's the economy. See, here in Florida, if the economy really tanks, the legislature has to go back into session and deal with the budget implications. And what they've done so far is pushed it off. There's an election coming up. They don't want to go back and deal with budget implications. And they don't want to, the governor's not calling on the president or others to do something and fund our schools, fund our states rather. And so you're seeing this huge spike. When we saw this spike in Florida, it was shortly after, within a couple of weeks, 3 weeks after we started opening back up, the numbers started going up and they've continued to go up because we keep opening and keep doing things as business as usual, as Fed said. It's business as usual. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep going. And the bar has moved too. It was first, but our numbers are under 5%. We're good. Well, our numbers are under 10%. We're still good. Now it's, well, let's not look at that number.
Yeah.
Let's talk about hospitalizations, which, by the way, they didn't even put that information out for the longest time. They didn't even tell people how many people were being hospitalized. Now they are, and we're seeing a spike in hospitalizations. We're seeing an increase in the number of deaths. And everything this governor has pointed to, as soon as he points to it, the numbers turn the wrong way. And he starts saying, well, let's look at something else. So it's kind of like trying to get people to follow the shiny object instead of focusing on what the data is showing.
Didn't you
look at the science and look at the data? It's not good.
Didn't your governor first blame the outbreak on Hispanics, and then once it got worse, just start not being transparent about the numbers? Is that accurate, Fed?
Yeah. I mean, he's blamed it on just about everybody.
I mean, he literally said Hispanic. I feel like he's like, it's in the Hispanic area. Like, don't worry about it in the white areas or whatever.
It was the migrant
worker area, right? Like don't worry about them.
But first, it was New Yorkers, to be fair, and then it was the migrant workers.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, our governor deals in the bowels of politics along with our president, and really what it amounts to is no leadership. Is no.
Let me ask you. That was my last question. I'll let you go. But what it would seem, I'm just going to tell you how it seems to me. I mean, looking at the national level, the president is not taking responsibility for this issue. He doesn't even see the issue, but he's basically saying let the states handle it state by state, which there could be an argument for, I suppose. But when it comes to funding, there has to be money from the federal government for these states. Then at the state level, at some state levels, the governor is saying, let the counties handle it. I'm not going to get involved. The problems, though, start arising when you have that piecemeal. And Andrew, you laid out a list of those problems earlier. And such as in your case, your teacher, your wives might have to go to school. But what about their kids? In your case, the kids aren't young. But what if the teacher's kids are young? Their school's open. They have to go to work. But what about their own kids? So my question is that how it's working? Is that the governor is not actually taking responsibility and saying, counties, you're in charge? Is that what you're going to tell me?
You're absolutely right. They're passing the buck. They're passing the buck because nobody wants to accept or own the responsibility. And what they fail to realize is that true leadership is defined in crisis. And I believe that history will frown upon this governor. History will frown upon this president simply because they have literally abdicated their responsibility to guide and lead. If we would have had a national mask order early on, if we would have closed our country and our state a little bit longer and done the opening in a more responsible way, not just say, hey, cut the lights on, get everybody out there, go get your hair cut, go jump in the pool, do these kinds of things. And this is what we've seen, this kind of haphazard, very, very irresponsible level of leadership that we've seen from our governor. And listen, at the end of the day, in about 4 weeks, Florida is going to be the petri dish for the nation if we don't get this right. And they are handpicking what kids can possibly die, what kids will be hospitalized, because it hurts poor kids mostly. It hurts Black kids. It hurts Hispanic kids. And it's going to hurt these communities that are in rural spaces that continue to deny along with political affiliation.
Well, when we look back, history will look back at the two of you as true leaders. You guys have, I've spent a lot of time with you guys. I've gotten to know you guys. I've been around your families, and you guys are as good as they come. You're whatever they would say, salt of the earth, great guys who I look up to. I really look up to both of you, and hearing all these problems today, I don't know how you are just conducting your lives, the stress, the anxiety. Take care of yourselves. This is the most important time, I would imagine, of your lives in terms of what we need from you, what your state needs from you. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you so much for joining me today, boys. Now get back to some more important work. And Fed, do you want to give out any orders, or should we just...
Oh, no. Listen, let me just say this. You're the best in the business. Thank you so much. Andrew Spar, I could not do this job without my co-pilot, and he is more than a co-pilot. Sometimes he just and kind of moves it along. So thank you all very much for having me.
Of course, you guys are awesome together.
Look at this love fest we're having, and look, Pete, thank you for continuing what you do. I think you provide an important voice, especially in a time like this. Obviously, Fed is an amazing leader. Has been all over the place, and what I love about being able to come on is we try to cover everything we need to. I do want to say one thing because Fed does have to give one order. Fed has to give the order on the HEROES Act because we need every one of your listeners to contact the U.S. Senate and the president and say, pass the HEROES Act, which the Congress did, and I'll let Fed end with that. But know this, teachers want to be back into school. We want to be back safely. And that's what everyone's talking about, except for the leaders making the decision.
Fed,
you want to close that with HEROES?
What's the HEROES Act, Fed?
So the HEROES Act has been passed in the House, and we need the Senate to pass it. What it is an act of Congress that is going to usher in billions of dollars to our schools that we need. It's going to cost more money to educate our kids in this new normal, to deal with infrastructure, to deal with air conditioning units, to deal with touchless hand devices, to deal with thermometers, to deal with all the things that we have to buy in order to keep your kids safe in this nation. We need this HEROES Act money. We need Mitch McConnell to develop some courage, and we need the rest of our senators to vote in favor of this so that our public schools can survive. We cannot open our public schools in this nation without the HEROES Act money that is coming from the federal government. So we're asking everybody to call your senator wherever you are and let them know that you care about public schools. And because you care about public schools, they must pass the HEROES Act.
Thank you, boys. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you now.
Thanks, Pete.
There they go. Fed Ingram, Andrew Spar, Florida Education Association. Amazing group of people down there. I love teachers and teachers unions, especially in, quote, right to work states, or as they say, right to work for less states. And that is the case down in Florida, where they are like 48th in a lot of different categories regarding education, and they're completely underfunded, especially in the more impoverished areas, the lower income areas where migrant workers are living and working down there, picking all of our food and processing it. So anyway, great organization of support and two awesome guys, super inspiring, happy to have had them on. And my final guest for today's episode is my friend Maura Quint, who I love. I was considering having her to be my co-host at one point, but I really wanted to be able to pay my co-host, and I just couldn't make that happen at the beginning of the podcast, so I headed off in a different direction. But I have her on whenever I can get her on. I always love talking to her about anything. She's one of the smartest and funniest people I know and have on the podcast, and we just jump right into it as we were, for some reason, talking about clothing and gender. So here's my conversation with Maura Quint, the executive director of Tax March on Twitter, at Behind Your Back, and the co-host of a new podcast called Plague Pals, which is awesome, or a new YouTube show, I should say. Look up Plague Pals on YouTube, and here's our conversation. What is a sundress?
Sundress is just any sort of light, cottony, usually kind of dress that is like something you'd go outside in when it's warm.
Then what is a camisole?
A camisole is like a tank top, basically, but made out of a nicer ingredient, a nicer fabric.
And then what is a blouse?
A blouse is a shirt that is usually more formal, often has buttons down the front, does not always, often is made of a silk combination, not always.
And the final wardrobe question here is one that's a little more controversial, and it's about gender. Can a man wear a blouse? Can a man say this is a blouse?
Of course.
I mean, he can, but he doesn't.
No, he doesn't, because it's a gendered word, but
right.
What's his face? Who am I thinking? Russell Brand wears blouses nonstop. I don't know if he calls them blouses, but that's pretty much what he's wearing. And
blouse can also be a kind of a verb, I feel like, too. Like, you should blouse that out a little bit, like your shirt.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, no?
I've never heard this as a verb.
I've lost the thread.
Now you're going, gender, fine, do what you want, but like keep it to the type of speech it is.
Thank you.
That's bullshit.
You have a much better handle on the English language as a great writer than I do, for sure. All right.
Yes,
lots to talk with you about today. Thank you for joining me, Maura, and congratulations on Plague Pals. I'm really glad that you're doing that with Bill Corbett. Everybody should go watch that on YouTube. I mentioned it in the intro, but what is it? You're doing a little fun like YouTube show. It's cool. How often are you doing it?
Yeah, we're doing it every week, once a week. It's like a podcast, except that we are too lazy to figure out how to actually do podcasts for real. But we know how to film a Zoom call. So, hey, now it's a YouTube show.
It's awesome.
That's what it is.
Everybody should go watch it. Go search it up. Plague Pals with Bill Corbett from Mystery Science Theater. And of course, Maura. I love it. And let me just steal a little bit of what you guys were talking about this week and what you've been tweeting a little bit about, because you're somebody who I really want to talk about this idea of cancel culture. What is it? Is it a thing for real? Is it? Do you reject the phrase?
I mean, I reject the idea of cancel culture in the finality of the word cancel, right? It is like you're done, no more, never to come back. That to me is what cancel means. And I don't really believe that exists in that way. There might be a culture of calling people out that people want to call a cancel culture. And there may be a world where we're like, people are having to face some... What's the word for when you do something and then there's an outcome for that, and then you have to some consequences for their actions.
I really thought you were struggling for a word, and I was all excited to help you. That was not genuine. You knew the word.
No, well, I just couldn't reach it, but I could vamp.
Right. Yeah, it's more about consequences, which there weren't always consequences? I mean, haven't there always been consequences though for the things you say? Nah, maybe not.
No, I mean, it depends who you are.
Right.
Some people, yeah. And some people still have it. But if you were in a particular position of power, no, you could get away with a lot of things, and you still can. I mean, that's just it. You still can for the most part. But sometimes now, occasionally, you might get called out a little bit.
What do you think of the writer Barry Rice, who made a huge splash with her resignation from the New York Times this week?
I know, she made that into quite a story. A person decides of their own free will and volition to quit their job and decides to make themselves somehow the victim there. It can be done. Certainly a person can be a victim and decide to quit their job. I just am not totally sold here on the picture that she is painting of the world that she's in.
Did you read that whole letter?
I didn't. I read part of it.
I didn't read it either, so I don't really feel too comfortable talking about it. I've just seen the reaction to it and the overall idea and proposition of this idea of cancel culture. And it's interesting because I took a week off, so I didn't really pay too close attention to it. I was really trying not to more look at the news, but it's hard to do. But there was a letter written in Harper's Magazine. It was an interesting group of people that had signed that letter, including Noam Chomsky, who is 150, as well as others. There. So it's like there is a left-right thing on cancel culture, but there's also within each political spectrum, within the left, there's ideas, and I can't quite figure out. I know what team I'm on, I think, but I still don't understand how I feel about this idea. And I'm weak-minded. I need to have the people I respect the most to sometimes tell me what they think about it. So what do you think about it?
Have you gotten any good leads, or have you already someone's taken you down any paths here that you're leaning towards?
Well, I mean, I have a perspective about it as a comedian. I think some things are different when they're done with the effort to make people laugh. And obviously the idea of punching down, people have debated and discussed a lot, but I'm not sure where I am on the idea that comedians can't do the like foreign accents or voices of people. I'm conflicted over that. Do you have feelings on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, ultimately, I don't feel in a utopian world, an actor and a voice actor would be just that, and they could inhabit any role that they were hired to inhabit, and that's what they should do. So I don't fundamentally believe, one person can't do a voice of somebody of a different gender or race or ethnicity. But I think that we are coming out of a world where the majority of roles in all of these fields, there are very few fields, if any, that I can think of to point to where white people haven't been given all of the advantages and dominated at the expense of other people. And so in that world, I think it's important that we be mindful, especially as white people, when we're taking a role that would have otherwise gone to somebody who has less of a shot and has been given fewer advantages. And that's where I think it's worthwhile to say, all right, yeah, maybe I don't as a white person, voice the role of a Black person because Black people are having a harder time getting work, and I'm now taking a job that they could have occupied. And I think that is it's important to be thoughtful and introspective in that way. But another way to fix that too would be, hiring more minorities to voice white roles in some places too. But
right. That's an interesting point
happening.
About the voiceover actors. I never thought about that, but like the comedians are different. And then of course, leaders are different. The principal of a school saying something in a voice, the governor of a state or the mayor or the CEO of a company. I feel like there's a lot of nuance with who's saying it and what they're saying and what the consequences can and should be. Is there, or is it pretty clear cut?
No, I mean, I don't think that anything is clear cut right now. And,
right.
Part of what's happening too is, one, we have a greater awareness taking place. People are, maybe they're not woke, but they're waking. Like there's, people are paying a little bit more attention, and that is happening and that is worthwhile. And our pendulum has been swung to one side so extremely for so long, where these groups of people get away with anything, regardless of how it affected others, that having this moment where we're going, hey, that's affecting people. That's actually mockery. That's creating hostile environments. That's, whatever the case may be, that's worthwhile. And there will be times as pendulums swing where it might go to a point where I don't know if that person should necessarily have been fired for whatever that particular action was. There will be individual moments where we can point to and say, maybe that was too extreme a response, but that's just going to be natural because we were so to the other extreme for a while. I don't think we're sustaining there. And I think that a lot of the craze, I would say, comes in when people are I found this one case where people went too far. That guy shouldn't have been fired.
Yeah.
And this is everything that's happening. And it's just going to keep happening. And they seem to think that that is just the tip of the iceberg of what's coming. And I don't think that usually is the case. Instead, I tend to see when those sort of things happen, there is kind of a, well, all right. And it sort of settles down around it and kind of the pendulum starts to even out and find this middle place. But there is panic surrounding it.
Yeah. Well, that's really well explained, well framed. I think it's also a little bit kind of disingenuous for you to be making those points, is that you haven't said anything about the fact that I'm wearing a sombrero and have a silly mustache on while we talk. What's that about? Why not acknowledge that? You just because you want to be invited back on the show?
No, absolutely not. It's just that when I burn that bridge, I want it to be more public. So I'm just taking screen grabs. And then afterwards, I want to make sure everyone sees it at once rather than just, if I said it now, you'd cut it out. It wouldn't, you'd chop it from, you wouldn't air the whole episode. It's the whole thing. I'm being strategic.
When I burn a bridge, I want to make it really public. That's a good technique. Yeah, if you're going to do it, let everybody know.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good advice. I try not to burn bridges, but if I do, everybody should watch that bridge aflame. I also feel I wonder if cancel culture kind of corresponds with the changing of our culture, with the idea that women and minorities, with the Me Too movement, with the Black Lives Matter movement,
women and minorities.
By the way, check out my new show, Women and Minorities, hosted by me, Pete Dominic. But this idea that's kind of age-old, that women and minorities are having more opportunity, getting a larger piece of the pie, and thereby taking mine as a white guy, isn't because it feels like most of the people are complaining about being canceled and cancel culture. Most of them, not all of them, but are straight white guys, it would seem. Obviously, Barry Weiss is not
in my mentions, at least. They're definitely overrepresented there. So, if that's the sample size we're using, then definitely that's who's doing the complaints. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. There is this fear, and the fear as well is also being told to them that they're supposed to be afraid, right? There's this constancy of people in power, and specifically people with wealth, who want to keep everyone divided and angry so that nobody ever turns their pitchforks on them. And, this is happening there too. It's not that we're not paying you enough or there's not jobs for you. It's that it's the immigrants' fault. They're coming and taking your jobs. And it's the minorities' fault. They're getting all of these extra special things that you're not getting, and you should be mad at them. And you should never, ever question that we are giving ourselves massive tax cuts and keeping you at poverty wages. Just overlook that part.
Or the less sexy but very real reason that your job's been automated.
Right.
You know, nobody that's a tough thing to demagogue if you're trying to win ratings and sell advertising.
And no one's stepping in to help you. No one's going to like offer you other opportunities because those would be of a cost to the wealthy.
Didn't Ivanka Trump say something about those people losing jobs?
Beans.
Need to.
I think she said eat beans. Yeah.
That was a weird thing that Ivanka Trump was kind of like propping up Goya, because in the olden times, if you worked for the government, you could never come out and tout a specific product really overtly like that. I mean, whoa,
yeah, there was
what
like
just
a whole,
happened?
What just happened? I don't know. Did you burn up?
I'm burning. What about, sorry, my phone started ringing and it went over there. I'll edit that out.
Was it something important?
No, not at all. Maybe it's just a buddy of mine who needs a new heart valve replacement. Want to talk about it. But anyway.
Is he a white guy, though?
Yeah, he's white. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
As long as he gets a white valve and not what he has had, which is apparently a pig valve. Anyway, he'll be fine. Yeah, it's not even the right species.
The skin tones match fine.
Yeah, so can you imagine caring? Can you imagine caring about where your organ, the gender,
I can't,
or
but someone does.
Someone's got to.
Someone out there does.
I don't want a black. I mean, people do say that about their physicians. I'm getting off subject. In the olden times, you would never be able to tout a product if you worked for the government.
Well, I think, is that the Hatch Act? Because I think that's me. I may be right. I may be wrong on that. You can call me up, but if I recall correctly. But I think that what happened was there was like these nice words saying you're not supposed to do that, and then the Trump administration came out and said, "So what if we do?" And everyone went, "Oh shit, we forgot to do that part. We forgot to do the part like what happens if you do this," and nothing does. So now you can just get away with it.
So I also want to talk with you about not only cancel culture and culture in general, which I always love talking with you about any of those things and language, but about that it was tax week. You are, of course, the executive director of Tax March, taxmarch.org. And so obviously you're doing a lot of work and talking a lot about that because July 15th was the postponed tax day.
That's right.
And first of all, why did they do that? Why did they change the date?
They changed it because we were in a pandemic and they needed to help people. And people could not be expected to go in and see their accountant during a pandemic. They who knows if they had the money on hand because there is a pandemic going on, but it's okay because now we fixed the pandemic. So it's fine. Everything's fine now. So it's no big deal. They postponed it and we're all happy now.
What do you think is kind of the most egregious tax policy? Because I know you could talk for hours about this, but I've been thinking a lot about the tax cut of 2017, which is really one of the only major legislative accomplishment for this president and the Republican Congress, who no longer is in charge, obviously in the House since the midterm elections. But before they lost the House, they had the Senate, and they were able to pass this massive tax cut. But it's interesting that I don't hear a lot of people proposing as a way to pay for all of what we need now in this pandemic to get rid of that tax cut for the super wealthy.
Additional tax in the CARES Act. They had additional tax incentives and cuts for wealthy and corporations.
Maybe I'm just
did the opposite.
Well, maybe maybe this is not the at this point the right thing to do to raise taxes on the wealthy during a pandemic. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, but you probably have. What are your thoughts on all of it right now, given that we need money? Everybody needs, and there's no way. It's not because we aren't working. You can't go to work. Well, a lot of people.
I think that, obviously Jeff Bezos is struggling right now, and it is a rough time for him. A pandemic has definitely taken a real hit to whatever the hell he does all day. Maybe his massive cushions fold with $1,000 bills, like maybe he had to take one out one day. I don't know what he's going through, and I sympathize with him greatly. But yeah, I definitely still think we can tax the rich. They're fine. Let's see, I think in 1991 we had like 60 odd billionaires, and now we're at like 600 and something. There's a tremendous amount of wealth hoarding that is taking place. And there is a point at which people have more money than they'll ever spend in multiple lifetimes. So yeah, they can withstand, even during a pandemic, some higher taxes. Definitely.
What about just another, going back to my question in terms of generally, what is some of these? What are the policies that you think? After reading David K. Johnson's books, I was just like, my eyes were open to our tax policies in America and carried interest and being taxed on your work versus your investments. I mean, I think a lot of Americans just don't understand it, especially Americans on the right that just don't understand that they're paying more in taxes and on their actual labor, their hourly wages or their actual work that they do. Then, a lot of people, I remember hearing something about, some people make more money in their sleep and interest on their wealth than the vast majority of Americans do on their actual work.
Oh, in a day, in a year. Yeah. It's easily, it's ridiculous. The majority of the wealthy, the majority of their income comes from these capital gains and investments, and does not come from work and labor. So one of the most straightforward, all right, let's get to it kind of policy changes that we can make is right now, capital gains are taxed at a much, much lower rate than work is taxed. So if we simply matched capital gains taxes to our marginal tax rates that we have on labor, we'd be instantly doing something to start refocusing our tax code. Restructuring it, I suppose, is probably the word I was going for. I didn't vamp as well that time, but I had it somewhere.
Also, my word wasn't a great suggestion that I said. I said reassess. You plowed right through it to restructuring, and then that's where we are right now.
We got there, but that would be it. That would be a really, that wouldn't fix everything, but we'd be on our way. And that's something that has been proposed. That exists right now. I believe it's Ron Wyden who is pushing that primarily. So it's not outside of the minds of our current politicians, and it could happen.
The other, I think, policy to talk about, because it's very relevant right now, and today's episode I'm talking a lot about education, is that your property taxes correspond to the quality of the schools, the public schools and education that you get. And right now, I just talked to Florida Educators Association president and vice president, and it's like that the Florida situation before the pandemic was crazy. The public schools were so underfunded in Florida. And obviously the property tax is the issue and how that works. It doesn't work that way, and I don't think in a lot of other countries. But that's a huge problem in America. And so as we're trying to figure out the school situation, it's that much harder for people living in more impoverished areas because they have to go to work. They most likely can't work from home. What about that policy, that tax policy, the property one, that it corresponds to basically directly how good your schools are? And I think it may differ from state to state, but I think it's pretty common in our country.
Yeah, states definitely deal with that in different ways, but that is a huge, I think that's a really, really big problem. And it's fundamental to the fact that we have these sort of the generational wealth that increases or decreases. And we have entire segments of our society who are being cast aside because of these cycles of poverty. And that is a massive, massive part of it. Everybody, when they're looking to buy a home, is like, well, what, if they have kids or they're thinking about having kids, it's about how good is the school district? And that's about where you can afford to be and where those taxes go and how it's all completely linked in together. And then you also look at who's been historically kept out of certain neighborhoods when we look at redlining, and we look at various ways that whole segments, Black communities in particular, have been excluded from living in certain places to keep areas white, wealthy, reinvesting in that same communities, increasing the generational wealth. It's just this constant circle that has to be changed. It just has to be changed. There's no justification here. We can't say no, it has to go.
I've heard people say nothing would make a bigger difference to decrease the gap of wealth inequality than drastically changing our tax policy in America, making it more fair. We can talk about minimum wage and raising the minimum wage and paying people more and so on, but I feel like that's a pretty good answer. It's all tax policy.
It is all tax policy. No, but it is, because tax policy is one of these issues that completely intersects with every other issue. Anytime you look at anything that you care about, whether it's like, how are we going to invest more in things that are going to save our environment, or how are we going to get people healthcare, or what are we doing with our educational system? It all comes back to like, wow, where are we getting the money from, and who's paying that money, and where is it coming? And so it all ends up at taxes. It like crosses across everything. I think it's a key fundamental issue, and an issue that historically, generally people have been shut out of. Like, they don't want you to know what the heck is going on. Marginal tax rates are confusing, and there is a complete disincentive to like teach people what that means. They want to keep taxes scary and inaccessible.
And one of the, it's always interesting to me to talk about where your taxes go. I mean, everybody's mad about how their taxes are spent, including progressives. Like, I'm outraged at how much of my money goes to defense, nationally, and how much of my money locally goes to law enforcement versus education, social workers, roads, bridges, etc. I mean, we all are entitled to our opinion because I think it's a representative of your morality about where your tax money goes. But I wonder what you think about this whole defund the abolish the police debate that it sounds like all of a sudden seems like we're not talking about this week as much. But nonetheless, that is a question about, if you can put the rhetoric away for a second, that is a question about where your local or state taxes generally go. And if you don't like money going to defense and you think there's a lot of waste there, then I think it's probably consistent to be that way with law enforcement, because there's so much waste in law enforcement in terms of the militarization of police and a bunch of stuff that they shouldn't be doing. What are your thoughts on law enforcement and the way that they are paid and the taxes that go to them?
Well, I mean, I'm totally in favor of the defunding the police messaging, and it needs to also go hand in hand with a lot of policies like decriminalization of marijuana, and reforming our prison system and the school to prison pipeline. All of these things are interconnected, and they all need to change sort of at the same time. But, what we have done is we just keep taking every problem that we can, and we say, well, the police will figure that out. We'll give them a little more money. They'll let them deal with that. And that has gotten us where we are, which is a completely broken society. And we just should not be turning to the police to deal with things that are, social service issues, that are things that like homelessness. The police shouldn't be involved. That should not be a police issue. We should take that money and invest it in solutions that are not going to just continue kind of locking people away and in this sort of cycle, but rather actually go to change things and help people.
And not a radical idea. In some communities, very progressive ones in this country, as well as other countries, it's done. Law enforcement, at least, not the entire criminal justice system, but certainly law enforcement and their interaction with the public is done completely different.
There was a tweet, this was like a couple of weeks ago, and I cannot remember which Republican politician did this, but, in response to all the defund the police calls, tweeted out this picture of a bear walking down like a town's roads and said, oh, all these people calling for defund the police. Yeah, sure. I'd love to have a social worker come out and deal with this. And he just got destroyed on Twitter because everyone was like, yeah, you don't want a police officer dealing with a bear. There's literally animal control. We have a whole department that would deal with this. But your instinct is like, well, I see a bear, so I'm going to call a police officer. Like, just that mentality is so fundamentally ridiculous.
I want to know who that was. I want to just read the reactions to it. By the way, I once saw I think it was a brown bear walking down the street, literally in downtown. In the town of Aspen, Colorado, I saw a bear walking down the street. And
how high were you?
I know I wasn't high yet. It was a morning, maybe it was, but it was
a morning.
The thing that's crazy though is I saw it attack and eat a very wealthy person, and I did nothing because of my disdain for the wealthy. And I think I probably should have done something.
I see. How do you know that person was wealthy? How do you know that wasn't just someone who robbed a wealthy person and was therefore wearing wealthy person stuff?
Oh, because it was Lance Armstrong.
Oh, okay. Well, he should have been able to deal with that. I mean, he probably would have been offended if you had intervened.
That's probably a good point. You had me cornered. I had nothing. I was like, I got to think of an actual wealthy person. But I nailed it because I came up with an actual wealthy person who lives in Aspen and who's universally hated. So we didn't mind him being eaten.
Wow. Well done. Like,
Thank
just
you.
like that. That's how quick your mind is working.
Complimenting myself is
amazing.
what the show's about. How are we doing in America with coronavirus, Maura?
Well, it's fantastic, right? It's all over.
Yeah. If the measure of excellence is it's everywhere and tons of people are getting sick and dying, then we're kicking ass, is what you're saying.
That's right. Top of the world, American exceptionalism. This is it. Blow off some fireworks. We did it.
How do you describe? I asked someone else, another smart person like yourself, this question today.
You speak to other people?
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Do you know this guy, Jared Yates Sexton? He's awesome. I'm
aware of him on Twitter, and I think I follow him.
Yeah. Well, I asked him, I'll ask you, how do you describe the kind of divisiveness of wearing a mask?
The divisiveness of
like
wearing
the
a
idea
mask.
that some people would be outraged that they would have to wear a mask to the point that people are killing people over it, literally fighting and killing people.
It's an absurdity. I mean, like, look, it's a pandemic. It was going to happen to us regardless of who was in charge. But this is probably, I think, one of the biggest things to point towards in terms of Donald Trump being absolutely terrible for this country. He's obviously been terrible in a million different ways, and Republicans in general have been. But right now, this particular moment of choosing masks as a cultural flashpoint, which he absolutely did. He absolutely fed. He didn't have to do. And just creating this in our country it's been really, I don't know. It's been fascinating. And
he
terrible.
denied it at first, and he continues to deny it, call it a hoax. So first of all,
and he wasn't going to wear a mask, and he didn't think people wanted to see him in one, and he didn't like the way it looked and all that.
The whole thing about wearing a mask was it was about his own vanity.
Yes,
he didn't want to wear one.
Vanity. That's right. Yeah, I mean, which is hilarious. Anytime it's him being vain about the way he looks, it just fucking kills me.
Right.
Look at him. How do you get to? You're not allowed to be vain. I'm sorry, you're not. Like you maybe 30 years ago you could be vain, but you're not there anymore.
He's
dude.
all throat.
Let it go.
Skin, throat waddle. Like a lot. When I look at him, my eyes generally go right to his throat. Whatever you call that situation that he's got going.
Oh yeah, no, he is the most pelican-looking motherfucker I have seen in a long time.
So ugly. He really is. He has become like a lot of guys. They get older, they get better looking. I think that's the case for me, for sure.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, you were an ugly kid, so.
Oh my God! Have you seen?
Idea.
Oh,
I have no idea.
I was all head, no body. My nickname in high school was Big Head Little Body. It hurt, but he does not. He is not aging well. But that's his fault. Because
he's not aging well, and that is absolutely his fault. But also, whatever, people can age, but the fact that he still put so much of his ego, I mean, okay, his ego is infinite, so I don't know how much he's putting in, but regardless, that he has so much ego about his appearance is an absurdity to me. It's so crazy.
I can talk to you. You're the best guest for anybody's podcast because you're able to talk about anything, and that's why I love. So and without any kind of major preparation, you're so good at that. And I just want to get your top
any preparation.
Well, you don't need to. You really don't. You think about these things a lot. You do a lot of reading. You're an intelligent, thoughtful person, and also a hilarious person. So
now we're at the compliment me part of the podcast. We did compliment you. Now
one
it's
of
all.
Funniest, smartest people. And when I first started the show, I wanted to make you my co-host and pay you for that, and I couldn't. But I think you're one of the smartest, funniest people. And so I want to just ask you a question about the Supreme Court. I mean, how do you what comes to mind? Which case or cases maybe do you think jump out at you for this term?
Oh, that's hard to say.
And you don't need to name the case, but I don't know if you know all the.
Yeah, I've memorized maybe 4 names of cases. But ultimately, the fact that we have so much of our democracy hinging on whether like one old lady has a bad fall on the stairs is maybe not the best system of government that we've set up. Maybe there's like a particular problem that we've put in place is how I feel generally about the SCOTUS. But my world being taxes, I mean, I was watching that tax case
right.
last week, which was, I mean, the sad thing is we got the good, like we should be celebrating. That was the good decision. They decided that Donald Trump is not above the law. He does not exempt from ever having to show his taxes. There are situations in which he could hand them over. And at the same time, it was such a frustrating case because they didn't need to take it up. SCOTUS could have let it go. The lower court had already ruled in the New York decision, and Trump could have just had to turn over his taxes, but instead they decided to take up the appeal. And then they delayed on it, and they ruled on it on their very last day in session. So they held it off to the last possible moment. And then what they said was, I mean, he's not technically above the law, but maybe just I don't know, ask the lower courts again. I'm sure that they'll figure it out this time. That's what they said, which
I love your interpretation of it. Yes, you should be covering the Supreme Court. It makes it so much easier to understand when you frame it that way. It's a good point. But, I just I can't stop thinking about so many of the things that people who support Trump just don't care about or look the other way on. Things that aren't liberal and they're not conservative, they're not Republican and they're not Democrat. Things like just attitude and behavior, but more specifically, the idea that you would be in government at any level and not have to be transparent about your investments. That's not liberal or conservative. It makes sense. You don't want somebody in charge of giving out your taxpayer money, government taxes, and maybe personally benefiting it. You also don't think that the mayor or the governor or the president should be able to appoint his own family to these positions. These are things that have always been consistent for the most part and egregiously wrong. But there's this kind of proof that it's a cult. It's like they don't care. Trump could come over and fuck my wife. I don't care. It's Trump. It's Trump. So he doesn't have to show his taxes. How do you see that? That mentality that if it's him, it's okay. No, it's not okay for any Republican or Democrat at any level of public office to not be transparent about where their money is and what they're invested in.
So I think that off the top of my head, I think there are like three groups. And when Tax March first started, it was just a grassroots march to have Donald Trump show his tax returns. And we were nonpartisan. And we had Republicans start up, headed a couple of various, marches in various cities, or at least were part of the planning committee and certainly came out. It was completely nonpartisan. And there were plenty of Republicans saying, yeah, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is just, I want the president to be showing us what the hell he's involved in. And I think that that's important for us to have any sort of oversight on governance. So that happened. And I think those people, I don't know this, but I'm just going to guess that those are like the Liberty Project Republicans now. Like that's kind of the route they went. They had a certain vision for what it meant to be a Republican, and Trump's not that. And they're over off to this side. And then beyond that, I think that there are like...
You mean the Lincoln Project?
Yeah, what did I say?
You said Liberty, and I started thinking about what's his name, the Liberty University people. Yeah, no, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, Lincoln. Yep, thank you. The Lincoln Project. Mm-hmm. And then I think there are like two groups left. There are the like cultists who not only would be like, yeah, Trump, you want to fuck my wife, but like, thank you, sir. Thank you for blessing my wife with your presidential dick. There are those people that are fully in the cult. They absolutely exist. But I actually think the majority of Trump land, of people who are still going to be voting for him, generally, unfortunately, I live in a very red place. And so I've had some conversations, or at least, been party to some. And they tend to be more like, yeah, that's not right. Yeah, I don't want a president to do that. Yeah, I don't like that he didn't show his tax returns. Yeah, I don't like that he put Ivanka in, yeah, they'll call all of it out. They don't like it. They wish he wouldn't tweet so much. They wish he wouldn't use any of that language. They don't really like who he is as a person. But, the Supreme Court, abortion, whatever their fundamentals are what's most important. And they believe that he will be putting in, the right people on the court, and he will be, fighting for war, whatever it is. Or maybe it's even like just straight out racism or immigration. But like, there's still, I think, even people in those worlds that are okay with saying like, yeah, no, I don't like this. I don't like what he's doing, but he still did these other things for me. And okay, take the good, take the bad.
With about a little more than 100 days left until November 30 election, what is your biggest concern about the election campaign, Joe Biden's campaign, the debates, free and fair election? What do you think? What keeps you up at night, if not any of those things?
No, all of it keeps me. I don't sleep anymore. I stopped sleeping. I gave that up.
Are you serious? Do you have sleep issues?
I do. Yeah.
I want to talk with every guest about that. I think everybody does.
Issues? Yeah. No, I'm like, it's like NyQuil or I'm awake. Those are the two options for my life at this point. Yeah. Anyway, no, there's so much, but I think voter suppression in general is probably the biggest concern that I have. I mean, I don't know what Biden will do or what they'll, or what October surprise or November surprise. I don't remember which surprise it is where they pull out some sort of oppo at the last minute.
I'm sure there'll be one in both months.
Yeah, there'll
with
be
this
surprises,
attorney general, especially.
But none of that, I don't think, really matters at all as much as voter suppression does. And we've seen in the primaries how terrible the voter suppression can be. And we were seeing that in Democratic primaries and in Democratic cities. So that doesn't give me a lot of faith for how a Republican administration is going to make it any better.
Do you think that, I mean, I don't know how closely you're paying attention to organizations like, I guess, Stacey Abrams is involved in organization and others. Do you think they can do enough to combat that, to make sure that there's enough polling stations, enough people? And I feel like these questions are kind of almost irrelevant because of who knows where coronavirus is going to be. But I said on yesterday's show, I said, well, I would wade through a river of corona and vote on a voting machine made of coronavirus. I think people are going to vote like they did in Wisconsin. I mean, I thought that was maybe they won't, but even given the danger, I think people will vote because the larger danger is 4 more years of this monster.
In Louisville, Kentucky, we saw that they closed the polling stations at 6, and there were people, in line all day who were banging on the windows until they opened those doors up and let them in. That was incredibly inspiring, actually, to see. It was on one hand.
I didn't see that.
Devastating.
Story, yeah.
But on the other, to watch their perseverance was fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, I think people will vote. I think most people find this pretty important to go out and do. But, I just don't know, because it also, of course, depends on like such a narrow geographical range of like, it has to happen in exactly these sort of cities that have overinflated importance right now in this election. So I have no idea. I don't know how it's going to go.
All right. Well, that's a good answer, actually. Really good answer, because people, I don't know is a very good answer for a lot of things these days. Uncertainty is killing us, but it's also the reality.
It is a lot.
All right. I'm going to go because my dog is about to flip out because my family's about to pull in my makeshift studio here. I don't have any soundproofing. So thank you, Maura, for joining me as always. I look forward to talking to you as soon as possible. And I hope everybody will go check out Plague Pals on YouTube, follow you on Twitter, and sign up. I literally, as I'm talking to you, I just got an email from Tax March. Go sign up and support taxmarch.org. Maura Quint.
Happy Tax Day.
Happy Tax Day. Thanks for joining me.
Bye.
There goes Maura Quint on Twitter at Behind Your Back. Check out the new YouTube show she's co-hosting called Plague Pals, and support the organization that she's the executive director of, the nonprofit called Tax March. Taxmarch.org. That is it for episode 145. Please support this podcast with a paid subscription. I want a lot of new subscribers today. Let's go. Make it happen. If you haven't signed up already, go to patreon.com/PDominic or click on the paid subscription link in the show notes that you can find wherever you're getting the podcast. We have an awesome community of listeners on Patreon. And how about Friday night? We hang out. Does that sound good? Friday night hangout on Zoom? We've done this a bunch of times. We've had anywhere from 50 to 120 people hanging out. It's only for subscribers, so sign up now and join us Friday night at 8 Eastern. Friday, 8 Eastern on Zoom. If you're a subscriber, you'll have the link, and I look forward to hanging out with you. Lots to talk about, lots to commiserate about, lots to connect about. Make sure that you know you're not alone. We'll have fun. We always leave having fun. So looking forward to that. Friday night, 8 o'clock, I've announced for a hangout, and looking forward to connecting with you guys. All right, that's it. I'm out of time. You're not alone. I love you. Goodbye.